Hello friends, about of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. The name said it all. This sleepy little town tucked between the Tennessee River and the Appalachian foothills was the perfect escape for anyone who craved a break from civilization. A year ago, that was me. I was desperate to lose myself in the wilderness, hoping nature would work its magic on my frazzled nerves. Life was a mess back then. I'd graduated college with a mountain of student loan and debt and zero job prospects. My dream career. Yeah, that was a bust. I applied everywhere, but couldn't even snag an interview. So, I took a soul-crushing day job to keep the lights on, figuring it was temporary. 6 months later, I was still stuck there, my hopes fading faster than my bank account balance. The job itself was a nightmare. My coworkers were great, but management. Don't even get me started. They were the micromanaging, energy draining kind that made you want to jump out the nearest window. Thankfully, our company had the foresight to install unbreakable windows, probably saving countless lives. To top it off, my relationship with my partner, Alex, was on the rocks. We were both at a crossroads, and I wasn't sure if we were headed in the same direction anymore. Our playful banter had turned bitter, and our home, once a sanctuary, felt more like a black hole. The trip to Treyland was our last ditch effort to salvage things. I needed to unwind, reconnect with Alex, and find some semblance of peace. If things went well, maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. If not well, I didn't want to think about that. Alex wasn't thrilled about the trip, especially when they saw the vehicle we'd be taking, my trusty, albeit beat-up car, affectionately named Deep Blue. Alex was convinced Deep Blue wouldn't make it up the mountain roads. Are you kidding me? This thing is ancient. It's got, like, 1,000,000 miles on it. And is that the check engine light? They'd exclaimed. I, however, had faith in Deep Blue. She's a classic, I'd argued. Besides, the check engine light's been on for years. It's practically a feature at this point. Despite my bravado, I was a little worried Deep Blue might not have the oomph to conquer those inclines. But, bless her rusty heart, she pulled through. Our cabin was straight out of a horror movie. It was ancient, isolated, and looked like it hadn't been updated since the Civil War. But hey, it was better than a tent. The interior was basic, but it did have a massive river rock fireplace and a surprisingly comfy king-sized bed. Honestly, the cabin itself was secondary. The real draw was the view. From the porch, we overlooked a breathtaking valley of golden sweetgrass that rippled in the breeze. A wooden walkway snaked through the grass, leading to the Tennessee River. It was postcard perfect. Across the valley, a dense pine forest cast long shadows, making it seem like night fell hours earlier there. When the wind blew, it sounded like ocean waves crashing against the shore. It was the soothing balm my soul needed. After unpacking, we headed into town for supplies. We needed the essentials. Of course, chocolate, marshmallows, graham crackers, but also actual food, water, and some beer. I figured we'd grab a couple of cords of firewood too, for the fireplace and the fire pit outside. I could already feel the tension melting away. We stopped at Eddie's shack, the local general store, and stocked up on everything we needed. We were joking around, reminiscing about the good old days, actually enjoying each other's company. Maybe this weekend wouldn't be a disaster after all. Then we met Eddie. Eddie was straight out of Central Casting for small-town eccentric. He was old, though how old was anyone's guess. Salt and pepper hair peeked out from under a faded Bass Pro Shops hat, and he sported a red and black plaid shirt that had seen better days, held up by a pair of equally worn suspenders, and get this, he was whittling a piece of wood into a tiny truck. Seriously, folk? He asked without looking up. What gave it away? I chuckled. He just laughed, this dry, crackling sound. I exchanged an amused glance with Alex. Where you folks stayin'? Chebbin' up near Chimney Valley, I replied. Nice spot. You here to fish? Hunt camp? Nah, just relax, I said. Good place for that. Eddie said, finally looking up. He gave us a once-over. Well, aren't you two a handsome pair? We both blushed. Thank you, Alex said with a smirk. I think so too. Ever been up this way before? Eddie asked, putting down his whittling and ringing up our supplies. Nope, first time, I said. Beautiful country, he said, letting out a low whistle. It really is amazing, Alex agreed. We're up above the Whippoorwill Trail. I can't wait to walk through that field. So many wildflowers. I saw some pictures on Instagram of the fireflies in the field at night, I added. We should definitely check that out. Eddie chuckled and shook his head. Not as good as advertised, I asked. Oh, it's pretty enough, he said. But if I were you, I wouldn't go wandering around that valley at night. Not at all. Wild animals, Alex offered. Things like that, but not that, he replied cryptically. What does that even mean? I pressed. You have any idea how old those woods are? That mountain range. Older than Jesus himself, Eddie said, punctuating his statement with another whistle. Older than the good Lord, and deeper and darker than hell itself. Lots of things out there we don't know about. I shot Alex a look that screamed, we should get out of here, but Alex was hooked. That inquisitive glint in their eyes told me we weren't going anywhere. But you're thinking of one thing in particular, aren't you? Alex asked, leaning in. Eddie nodded as he bagged the marshmallows. Yup. One specific creature I'd steer clear of, Are there others you'd invite in for tea? I quipped, trying to lighten the mood. Eddie laughed. Not really. Besides, not a tea drinker myself. More of a bourbon man. So, what's the creature? Alex asked, their curiosity piqued. They come as fireflies, Eddie said, dropping the chocolate bars into the bag. But they don't stay that way. That's how they get around, how they blend in. Once they change, though, hoo boy. I wanted to say, I didn't see any monsters on Instagram, but I bit my tongue. Besides, a part of me didn't want to hear any more. I knew how my brain worked. Later that night, when Alex was snoring peacefully beside me, I'd be the one lying awake, freaking out about firefly monsters. What is it? Alex pressed again. Eddie looked up, his lower lip bulging with chewing tobacco. He looked Alex dead in the eyes and said, The Mayman. The what now? I don't know exactly what they are, Eddie admitted, but I know to stay away from them. What do you know? Alex insisted. Were they people? I asked, already dreading the answer. In a way, yes, and in a way, no, he said. I hear they look like a person, but taller, and their eyes glow green. That's how they blend in with the fireflies. But that ain't the worst part. We waited with bated breath, but Eddie just handed us our bags. Donks too. That'll be $22.35. I reached for my wallet, but Alex stopped me. Eddie, what's the worst part? Oh, he said casually, they got long blades for arms, and once they spot you, he trailed off, leaving the rest to our imagination. Do they follow you? Alex asked, their eyes wide. Oh, yes, Eddie said, spitting into a styrofoam cup. Need to get near a fire to keep them at bay. Or so I'm told. Again, I ain't never seen one myself. I wouldn't want to either, I said, handing over some cash. If you got a fireplace in your cabin, he said, handing me my change, I'd keep a fire burning just in case. They can't use doors, but they can come down chimneys. Maybe I'll take another cord of wood, I said, handing Vrihim a $5. Have a good one now, okay? Enjoy Mother Nature. She's a beautiful woman, he said with a wink. We practically flew out of the store, leaving Eddie to his whittling. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, but I knew it wouldn't last. Alex was bursting with questions. What the hell was that back there? They finally blurted out. I have no idea, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. The Mayman, Alex said, their voice a mix of disbelief and fascination. They come as fireflies, I said, doing my best Eddie impression. Alex gave me a withering look. That was terrible. I'm working on it, I defended myself. You think there's any truth to it? No way, I interrupted. It's just some backwoods story to scare tourists. Did it work? Alex asked, a mischievous glint in their eyes. Nope, I lied. I don't think Eddie's the most reliable narrator. Alex laughed. Probably not. Hey, did you grab some booze back there? Yeah, why? Alex grinned and launched into their own Eddie impression. Ain't much of a tea drinker myself. I'm a bourbon man. I had to admit, it was spot on. Alex always nailed their impressions. We both laughed, the tension from Eddie's story momentarily forgotten. We got back to the cabin with a bit of daylight left. I wanted to get a head start on dinner, but Alex was itching to explore. Don't you want to walk down to the river? They asked, already heading for the door. I do, but dinner. We'll be here when we get back, Alex said, waving a dismissive hand. Come on, let's go. Should I start a fire? I asked, thinking about Eddie's warning. Just prep it, Alex said with a grin. And let's hope the Maymen don't mess with your carefully arranged kindling. Hilarious, I deadpanned, but I prepped the fireplace anyway. It was a good call, because the walk to the river took longer than we expected, and by the time we got back, we were starving. A rickety wooden staircase led down from the cabin to Chimney Valley. At the bottom, the path split into 3 trails. We took the most popular one, the Whippoorwill Trail, a raised boardwalk that wound through the tall grass and wildflowers. The walk was incredible. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers and the sound of the rushing river. Birds chirped, bees buzzed, and the valley was alive with color. It was mesmerizing. We reached the river and dipped our toes in the icy water. No swimming today, Alex declared, shivering. We sat on the bank talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. It was exactly what we needed. But we lost track of time. The sun began to set, and we realized we'd be hiking back in the dark. Crap, Alex muttered. The one ye should have headed back sooner. By the time we were halfway back, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the valley was cloaked in shadow. Eddie's words echoed in my mind. Deeper and darker than hell itself. Despite the creeping darkness, the valley was just as beautiful at night. The wind rustled through the tall grass, creating waves of silver under the starlight. The river's roar was a constant, soothing presence. We held hands, walking slowly, savoring the moment. This feels like a dream, Alex whispered. I know, I said, squeezing their hand. I needed this so much. When we needed this, Alex corrected gently. We needed this, I echoed, smiling. We were getting close to the stairs, but I couldn't see them yet. The thought of navigating those rickety steps in pitch black wasn't exactly comforting. Suddenly, Alex gasped. Look! They exclaimed, pointing into the darkness. Oh my God! There are so many. Thousands of fireflies blinked around us, their green and yellow lights dancing in the darkness. It was magical, like something out of a childhood fairy tale. I put my arm around Alex, feeling a wave of contentment wash over me. This is incredible, I whispered. I'm so glad we came down here tonight, Alex said, beaming. I'm in too. I have to get a picture, Alex said, pulling out their phone. Come closer, I'll get a selfie with the fireflies in the background. For the gram, I teased. Alex ignored me, held up their phone, and snapped a photo. The flash went off, momentarily blinding us. Oh, I groaned, rubbing my eyes. Sorry, Alex said, giggling. That was dumb. Photo flash off, I reminded them. Right, sorry, Alex said, fumbling with their phone. I'll put it on night mode, but you have to stand still for a few seconds. I can handle that, I assured them. We posed again, and this time, there was no blinding flash. Alex squealed with delight when they saw the picture. Look at how many fireflies there are. I took the phone and zoomed in. We were surrounded. It was a stunning photo. Alex always had a knack for capturing the perfect shot. But then something caught my eye. Between Alex and me, in the background, were two glowing dots. At first, I thought they were fireflies, but as I zoomed in closer, I realized they were eyes. Someone was standing behind us. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I had to warn Alex. I opened the memo pad on their phone and typed, "Someone is behind us." In the faint glow of the screen, I saw Alex's expression shift from joy to horror. They snatched the phone back and typed, "Are you sure?" I showed them the picture again. Their jaw dropped, and the phone started to tremble in their hand. I grabbed their hands, trying to calm them both down. Leaning in, I whispered, "On 3, we run. Don't look back. Just run for the stairs, okay?" Alex nodded, their eyes wide with fear. 1, 2, 3. We took off like a shot. At first, all I could hear was the pounding of our feet on the boardwalk, and for a split second, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I heard it, a high-pitched scream, echoing through the valley, sending chills down my spine. I'd never run so fast in my life. "What the fuck is that?" Alex screamed. "Just run," I yelled back. Alex reached the stairs first and started taking them 2 at a time. I was terrified the old wooden stairs would collapse under our weight. But that was the least of my worries. The creature was gaining on us. Its footsteps were heavy, and I could hear something sharp, like knives scraping against the wood with every stride. Eddie's words about blade arms flashed through my mind. "Keep going," I urged Alex. The whole staircase shook as we scrambled upwards. I was 2/3 of the way up when Alex reached the top. "Hurry up," they pleaded. "Go inside the cabin," I shouted. "I'm right behind you." Alex hesitated for a second, then sprinted towards the cabin. I was almost at the top when I felt the stairs shudder violently. I risked a glance back and saw those glowing green eyes staring up at me. The Mayman screamed again, the sound piercing my eardrums. The moon emerged from behind a cloud, and for a fleeting moment, I saw its light glint off the creature's arms. Eddie hadn't been lying. They were blades. Long, sharp blades. I watched in horror as the Mayman used them to propel itself up the stairs, 4 at a time. Adrenaline surged through me. I flew up the remaining steps and burst through the cabin door. Alex was standing there, frantic, urging me to hurry. I slammed the door shut and locked it. "The bed," I yelled, pointing to the king-sized bed. We both grabbed it and dragged it in front of the door, barricading ourselves inside. "What the fuck is happening?" Alex asked, their voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, my heart pounding. "But we're safe in here." "Are we?" Alex asked, their eyes wide with fear. "We have to be," I said, trying to convince myself as much as them. The Mayman reached the top of the stairs and let out another ear-splitting scream. We covered our ears, the sound echoing through the small cabin. I couldn't believe no one else in Treyland had heard it. We waited for the creature to start battering down the door, but nothing happened. I peeked through the window, trying to spot it, but I couldn't see anything. Where was it? Then I heard a loud thump on the roof. It had jumped up there. But why? Then I remembered Eddie's words. "Thee can come down chimneys." "It's going to come down the chimney," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "Fire," Alex said urgently. "We need a fire. Lighter. Give me a lighter." Alex frantically searched their pockets and pulled out an old Zippo. I snatched it and ran to the fireplace. I could hear the Mayman scrambling on the roof above, getting closer to the chimney. As I reached the fireplace, I remembered I'd already prepped it. I laughed, a hysterical, breathless sound. My hands shook as I flicked the Zippo, trying to get a flame. Come on, I muttered, my voice a desperate plea. The Mayman reached the top of the chimney and screamed again. I fumbled with the lighter, dropping it in my panic. Fuck, I hissed, scrambling to pick it up. I spun the flint wheel frantically, sparks flying but no flame. Light the fucking fire, Alex yelled. I could hear the Mayman's blades scraping against the river rock at the top of the chimney. It would be inside any second, and we had blocked the only exit. My heart hammered in my chest. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I spun the flint wheel again, harder this time, ignoring the sharp pain as it dug into my thumb. Finally, a flame ignited. Just as I saw the tip of a blade appear in the fireplace opening, I dropped the Zippo into the kindling. The fire caught instantly, flames licking upwards. The Mayman screamed again, but this time, it was a scream of pain. The blade retreated, and I heard the creature scrambling back up the chimney, away from the fire. It reached the top and let out another agonizing cry, then used its blades to launch itself back into the darkness. I collapsed onto the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. Alex crawled over to me, and we held each other, speechless. The adrenaline slowly draining away. This was definitely not the relaxing weekend getaway we'd envisioned. Eventually, as exhaustion took over, Alex fell asleep. I stayed up the rest of the night, feeding the fire, making sure the flames never died down. Just before dawn, I dozed off, but the sunlight streaming through the windows woke me up. Alex stretched and yawned. "We okay?" they asked, their voice hoarse. "Right as rain," I said, though I felt anything but. "We're leaving, right?" "Fuck yes," I said with a newfound appreciation for the safety of civilization. We pushed the bed away from the door and packed our bags. I lit one of the remaining logs from the fireplace, figuring it might come in handy as a makeshift torch. I didn't really think the Mayman would still be lurking around in daylight, but I wasn't taking any chances. "I can drive first," Alex offered, and I practically threw the keys at them. I was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline fumes. I knew I'd be out like a light the second my head hit the seat. Alex tossed the last of our bags into deep blue and slammed the hatchback shut. "Think this thing will make it home?" they asked, eyeing the car dubiously. "Never doubt deep blue," I said, though a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. "You're the only one," Alex said with a wry smile, sliding behind the wheel. I walked over to the fire pit to extinguish my torch when I heard a rustling at the edge of the woods. I froze, gripping the burning log tightly. I thought these creatures only came out at night, but what if I was wrong? "Start the car," I yelled to Alex. I heard the engine sputter and cough, but it wouldn't turn over. Alex tried again and again, with no luck. Could anything else go wrong? They shouted out the window, their voice laced with frustration. That's when we heard it. The Mayman scream. It burst from the trees, a horrifying silhouette against the morning sky, and launched itself towards me. Time seemed to slow down. I heard Alex yelling, the car struggling to start, and the whoosh of the creature's blades as it descended. I saw my own terrified reflection in its glowing green eyes, and then I remembered the burning log in my hand. As the Mayman was just feet away, I swung the torch, smashing it into the creature's face. It let out a horrifying shriek and erupted in flames, like it was doused in gasoline. It crashed into me, but I kicked it off and scrambled to my feet. "Go, go, go," I screamed, diving into the car. Alex slammed the key into the ignition one last time, The engine roared to life. They threw the car into drive and floored it. We fishtailed wildly, then shot down the mountain road, leaving the burning Mayman behind. "You're getting a new car," Alex said, their voice shaky but firm. "Deep Blue's had a good run, but fuck." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know." We didn't stop driving for 3 hours. We both flipped off the "Welcome to Trailand" sign as we passed it. We were never going back. Against all odds, things got better after that trip. I guess facing death really puts things into perspective. Alex and I had a long talk, and we decided to stay together. We're still going strong. Work got better too. Once I learned to leave the office drama at the office. I'm still searching for that dream job, but hey, that's the American dream, right? We're all searching. Last night, after Alex fell asleep during our Netflix movie marathon, I stepped out onto our balcony. I looked out at the city lights, the noise a constant hum compared to the quiet of the valley. It wasn't the same, but it had its own kind of comfort. I took a sip of my beer, letting the city sounds wash over me. Then I heard it. A scream. The Mayman scream. I snapped to attention, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. No fireflies, no blades, no glowing eyes. Maybe I was just hearing things. PTSD probably. I saw it burn. It had to be dead. But just to be safe, I went back inside and turned on our gas fireplace. Just in case. "I burned you once," I thought, a shiver running down my spine. "I'll do it again." Okay, so this is a story I've needed to get off my chest for years. It's been gnawing at me like a splinter you can't quite dig out. It happened a decade ago, but it feels like yesterday. Honestly, it's so messed up I've never told anyone about it. But here goes. This all went down in a place called the Weeping Woods. Yeah, creepy name, right? It's miles from civilization, totally desolate. Let me back up a bit and explain how I even ended up in that godforsaken place. See, I was in college, studying social sciences with 3 friends, Liam, Noah, and Maya. We were all obsessed with weird stuff: culture, history, myths, the occult, you name it. We were looking for a research project, something different, something with an edge. It was Liam who suggested the Weeping Woods. He grew up in Pennsylvania near this creepy forest with a seriously disturbing legend. Maya, our resident folklore nut, was instantly hooked. Road trip, camping, A&D research project all rolled into one. "Hell yeah," she said. "No way anyone else is doing anything this cool." I couldn't argue with that, and Noah, well, he wasn't thrilled about the spooky stuff, but he went along with it. So, we packed up Liam's truck, this beast of a Silverado that could haul anything with tents, food supplies, and all our recording gear. The drive up to Pennsylvania was actually pretty chill. Liam and I took turns driving, and he filled us in on the legend of the Weeping Woods. Apparently anyone who went in there came out, well, weeping. No one from his town would go near the place. We brought saws and towing cables just in case the road's blocked, Liam told us. That old track leading to the woods is barely used. Noah groaned. Oh, of course we had to pick the scariest, most backwater place in the world. Maya just laughed. Damn right we did. So, why were people crying? I asked. It had to do with the Woodwick Walker, Liam said. They were forced to leave people behind, but they could never really explain what happened. Some mumbled about a man in the woods, part of the forest itself. Maya was practically bouncing in her seat. Oh, I love this. Tell us more. Liam went on. The one thing everyone agrees on is this: don't look at his face. If you see him, close your eyes. If you can't do that, stare at your feet. Nothing else. Dude, you got really serious just now, Noah said. Liam cleared his throat. Did I? Sorry, I guess it still freaks me out a little, Have you ever actually been to the Weeping Woods? I asked. Just to the edge, Liam admitted. This legend scared the crap out of me as a kid. I grew up in a wooded area, and I'd always imagined seeing him between the trees. I raised an eyebrow. If you're so freaked out, why'd you suggest it for our project? Only way to overcome a fear is to face it, right? He said. Maya nodded. True. I gotta admit, the way Liam talked about it, it started to get to me too. Even Maya was a bit more subdued, and Noah was practically shaking in his boots. But we pressed on. Finally, we reached this tiny town in Pennsylvania. It was so small. I couldn't believe anywhere could be more remote. There was just one diner, and we stopped for breakfast. When we told the waitress where we were going, her face went white. Promise me you'll keep your eyes on the ground in those woods, she pleaded. We laughed it off, but she was dead serious. As we left, Liam said, See, it's a whole thing out here. And you thought this was a good idea? No groaned. Relax, guys, Liam said. It's just a legend. Maya, ever the researcher, chimed in. We should come back here after and interview her, and any other locals. It'd be great for the project. Hell, we should interview Liam too, I said. He's got plenty to say about it. Liam just sighed. Yeah, get in, we're losing daylight. Just how far is this place anyway? 20, maybe 30 miles, Liam said. No one really knows for sure. Knows what? Noah asked. How far the Weeping Woods actually are, Liam replied. The road there is kind of weird. You'll see. He wasn't kidding. The turn off was this barely visible dirt track, all overgrown and littered with branches. The road itself was a nightmare, twisting and turning with no logic. We felt like we were going in circles. We've turned every which way, but the compass still says northwest, I said, pointing at the dashboard. Liam nodded slowly. The road leads northwest into the Weeping Woods, no matter what. That doesn't make any sense, Maya said. Told you it'd be weird, Liam muttered. He was getting tense. You good, bro? I asked. Yeah, sorry, he sighed. This road just gives me the creeps, that's all. Just then, we rounded a bend and saw a massive fallen log blocking the road. Perfect, Noah groaned. Liam swore under his breath. I'll take care of it, I said. No worries. Marcus and I will get some pictures and video while you work, Maya said, grabbing her camera. I stepped out of the truck. The first thing that hit me was the silence. It was this deep, heavy quiet, broken only by the wind rustling the leaves. It was weird. I felt like I had to whisper. A thick fog had rolled in, making everything seem even more muffled and eerie. I walked to the back of the truck, and Liam joined me. I can handle this myself, you know, I said. He shook his head. Nah, I'll help. It's all good. Something about the way he said it made me wish he'd stayed in the truck, but we grabbed the saws and headed for the log. It was huge, with branches tangled in the trees at the edge of the road. What do you think? I asked Liam. Cut the branches, then tow the log. He nodded and we got to work. The sky was getting darker, even though it was barely afternoon. The noise of the saws felt wrong, like we were violating some sacred silence. It's weird how it feels like evening already, I said. Yeah, that happens, Liam replied. Nothing unusual. He stopped mid-sentence. I turned and saw it, a pale, thin limb disappearing behind a tree. What? Liam asked. I saw something, I stammered. But when I looked again, it was gone. Just a twisted tree trunk. I must have been imagining things. You sure? Liam asked, his eyes still fixed on the woods. Yeah, it's nothing. Fog's messing with my mind, I said, trying to laugh it off. We finished cutting the log and towed it out of the way. It's dark, Maya said as we got back in the truck. Too dark, I agreed. The sky looked like night, but it was only 1 p.m. Yeah, this place is weird, I muttered. It's not too late to turn back. No pleaded. No way. Maya snapped. We've come too far. I got some footage while you guys were sawing, Maya said, lowering her voice. And I talked a little about Liam's behavior too. I glared at her. Really? Of course, she said. His little freak-out might be the best part of this project. She wasn't wrong, but it still felt weird to be analyzing our friend behind his back. I don't like it, No mumbled. You don't like any of this, Maya retorted. Liam got back in the truck looking pale. Finally, let's get going. We set off again. The fallen log we just moved drifted past my window, and I thought I saw another pale limb vanish behind a tree. I tried to ignore it. The road seemed to narrow, the trees leaning in. We could barely see the sky anymore. With every turn, the fog thickened and the daylight faded. At least the road's clear, I said, trying to sound positive. Liam switched on the headlights. I couldn't see anything beyond the nearest trees, and honestly, I was relieved. There's a little more to the legend, Liam said after a while. We all looked at him. The victims of the walker, he explained, they're said to remain bound to the weeping woods. Their spirits. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Some say they've seen those spirits trying to leave, but they can't. They're trapped. Unable to move on, Maya said quietly. Something like that, Liam replied. We didn't talk much after that. The rumble of the truck and the growing darkness were almost hypnotic. Finally, at 2:45 p.m., we reached the end of the road. It opened into a small clearing. Holy crap, there's a car, I exclaimed. Liam looked over. No and Maya leaned forward to see. Oh God, No whispered. How common is that? Maya asked. Liam cleared his throat. Not very. But there's a legend we're not the only ones who've braved the weeping woods. I peered into the car. It was empty. Probably just someone exploring like us. Yeah, Liam agreed. So this is it? Maya asked. Yep, Liam said. Past that tree line, that's the weeping woods. Looks the same as the rest of these woods, I pointed out. It's not, Liam insisted. Come on, let's make camp. He jumped out of the truck. Noah groaned. Let's just get this over with. While the others unloaded the truck, I walked over to the abandoned car. It was old, rusted, and covered in grime. I couldn't see inside. I rubbed some of the dirt off a window and peered in. Nothing unusual. Just some junk, a travel mug, a tote bag. But then I saw it, a slip of paper on the dashboard. I walked around to get a better look. I spat on the windshield and wiped it clean. The paper had something written on it in big, bold letters. Gineme lo kai hevi totl lenin it was a siras. I backed away from the car. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, making the trees hiss. I called. They came over. What is it? Maya asked. Read this, I said, pointing to the note. They each took a turn reading it. Oh God, Noah whispered. Have people been known to come here to, commit suicide? Maya asked Liam. Like that forest in Japan. Liam shook his head. Not that I know of. This person seriously did not come back, Noah said, his voice trembling. He could have gotten lost. I offered. We all looked at Liam. He just shrugged. At what point do we concede that this forest is actually dangerous? Noah asked. You're an academic, Noah, Maya said. Do you really believe in the Woodwick Walker? I'm not saying that, he retorted. But legends come from somewhere, don't they? In this case, I'd say it's to justify the dangers of this cursed place. Maya scowled. How are you feeling about all this? She asked me. I looked at her, then at Noah. More curious than scared at this point. Sorry, Noah, Maya said, turning to Liam. And you? You good with this? I want to see this through, Liam said, his voice firm. He looked back at Noah. Well, Noah groaned for what like the 100th time that day. All right, whatever. Let's go. We shouldered our backpacks and followed Liam into the weeping woods. I don't know what I expected when we crossed the tree line. Maybe some sudden chill, a shift in the air. something to announce that we were in the weeping woods. But it was just trees. More of the same creepy, silent trees. We hiked for about half an hour, Liam marking trees as we went so we could find our way back. "How far are we going?" No asked, sounding anxious. "However far we want, I guess," Liam replied. "There's nowhere specific to go." "Yeah, once you're in," Maya agreed. "We drove all this way, might as well make it count." "No," Noah said, dropping his bags. "We're stopping here." "Is this spot okay?" I asked Liam. "Good as any," he shrugged. "Fine by me," I said. "Let's set up camp." It was getting pretty dark, so we had to use our flashlights. I pitched the tents. Liam gathered firewood. Noah started on dinner, and Maya set up the recording equipment. We didn't talk much. I think we were all feeling the weight of the day, the weirdness of the place. We just wanted to get settled. Liam managed to get a fire going, despite the damp wood. We set up our chairs around the fire pit, and Maya positioned the cameras and microphones like some kind of creepy audience. I checked my phone. It was 4:42 p.m. I looked up and saw a faint gray light filtering through the leaves. A breeze rustled past, carrying fallen leaves. "You have any bars?" Noah asked. I checked my phone again. "Nope. Lost them all back on that road." "Told you it was weird," Liam mumbled. We talked for a bit longer, keeping our voices low. Every now and then, one of us would glance over our shoulder into the deepening darkness. It was like the shadows were alive, pressing in on our little circle of light. By the time we ate dinner, it was pitch black beyond the firelight. The wind had died down, but every now and then, it would sigh through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. "That was delicious," Maya said, finishing her stew. "Thanks." "No. No problem," he replied. "It's too dark to film anything," Maya said, "and too early to sleep. How about some ghost stories?" I laughed. "Hell yeah." Even Noah cracked a smile. We sat around the fire, swapping cheesy stories. Surprisingly, the creepiest one came from Noah, a tale about the haunting of little Landry. But that's a story for another time. After a couple of hours, we decided to turn in. We were exhausted, and we needed to be up early to explore. We doused the fire and crawled into our tents. Lying in my sleeping bag, I was surrounded by absolute darkness. I couldn't see a thing, not even my hand in front of my face. The only sounds were the occasional rustle from the other tents and the sighing wind. As creepy as it was, there was something comforting about being bundled up in my sleeping bag, surrounded by nature. I drifted off to sleep. But my sleep was restless, filled with nightmares I couldn't quite remember. Then, I woke up to the sound of creaking wood. It was a slow, drawn-out creaking, like something heavy was moving through the trees. It seemed to be coming from all directions. I sat up, heart pounding. Was it just the wind? Or was it something else? I thought about calling out to my friends, but I was too scared. Images flashed through my mind, grotesque shapes moving in the darkness. Then I heard Liam's voice, a terrified whisper. "He's here. Stay in your tents. Don't look at him." A chill ran down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut. The creaking got closer. I heard someone moving in one of the other tents. Who the hell was making noise? Didn't they know? The whispering in the creaking got louder, almost like words. Then, a blinding light flashed on. I opened my eyes and saw Liam standing outside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Liam," I gasped. "What are you doing?" "Quiet," he hissed. "Close your eyes and be quiet, I'm fine." But his voice sounded anything but fine. I closed my eyes again, my heart pounding. The creaking was right outside my tent now. I could hear Liam's ragged breathing, the hint of a whimper. I almost started praying, but then the creaking stopped. Just like that, it was gone. A breeze swept through the campsite, and the oppressive presence vanished. I opened my eyes and saw Liam's flashlight lying on the ground. But Liam was gone. I scrambled out of my tent. "Liam," I shouted. Maya was emerging from her tent, her eyes wide. "He's gone," she whispered. No poked his head out, his face pale. "Liam," he called. "He's gone," I yelled. I picked up Liam's flashlight and swung it around, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness. I pointed the light at the ground where he had been standing. There was a clear impression in the mulch, but no footprints leading away. Maya started laughing. "Oh, this is great. This is absolutely fantastic." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "It's a prank, of course," she said. "Liam's got us good." I tried to think. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was just a really elaborate prank. "Are you kidding me?" Noah whispered. You both heard the wood, didn't you?" "Yeah, but we're in a forest," I said. "A creepy forest." "Exactly," Maya agreed. "Liam's just pulling the prank of the century. He's probably got the whole thing on camera." "We'll never live this down," I said, trying to laugh. "We'll look at the footage. That'll settle your nerves, right, No?" He nodded. "Let's see." Maya grabbed the camera that was pointed at our camp. I built up the fire again while she reviewed the footage. I checked my phone. It was 12:15 a.m. "Ha!" Maya exclaimed. "Told you so." She crouched between No and me and hit play. We saw a grainy image of our tents, lit by Liam's flashlight. He was looking around, and for a moment I thought I saw something in the background, but the image was too blurry. "Is there audio?" I asked. "Should be," Maya said. "Then why isn't there any sound?" She shrugged. "Must have been imagining things." Liam froze, his flashlight pointed into the darkness. Maybe he saw something off camera. Or maybe he was just messing with us. He set the flashlight down and walked in the direction he was looking. We could hear the crunch of leaves under his feet. "See," Maya said, pausing the video. "That bastard pranked the hell out of us." She stood up. "Liam, come out already. The prank's over, you win." But there was no response. She called out a few more times, and I even joined in, but Liam didn't answer. "You still think this is a prank?" No asked, his voice trembling. I looked at him, unsure. "Yes," Maya said firmly. No frowned. "Then where the hell is he?" Maya looked away. I sighed. "Look, whatever this is, we have to find him. We can't risk him getting lost or hurt out there." No groaned and buried his face in his hands. "That's fair," Maya said. "It's freezing. Let's bundle up, grab some lights, and head out. I'll keep the camera rolling." "I'll grab a knife," Noah said. Maya and I exchanged uneasy glances. "To mark the trees," he explained, rolling his eyes. "So we can find our way back." "Ah, smart," I said. A few minutes later, we set out into the forest, following the direction Liam's flashlight had been pointing. We called his name, but our voices grew less confident with each repetition. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from our flashlights, making it hard to see. "Liam." Jack. "Liam." Noah cursed. "I've marked 15 trees. We should turn back." "Okay," I sighed. "We'll head back and try a different direction." As we turned, there was a sharp crack. Maya screamed. What is it?" I asked, rushing to her side. She was staring at the ground, one hand clutched to her chest. "Oh God." "What?" No, and I leaned closer. There, in Maya's footprint, was a bone, a broken, old bone, and she whispered. "What?" I said, shocked. "How do you know?" "Because I studied this in a recent course," she hissed. "That is without a doubt a human femur." I grimaced and brushed away the mulch with my boot, revealing more of the skeleton. "You don't think?" No trailed off, his eyes wide with fear. "You mean?" I looked at the skeleton. "No, definitely not. These bones are old." "Maybe it's the guy from the car," Maya suggested. "Maybe," I murmured, uncovering more of the corpse. Soon, we were looking at a full human skeleton. The arms were folded over the ribcage, and clutched in the skeletal hands was a bundle of sticks. "Jesus Christ," Maya muttered, still filming. Let's get back to camp. A sense of dread washed over me. We hurried back, Noah leading the way, following his markings on the trees. Maya was unusually quiet, her face pale. Back at camp, Noah immediately started gathering wood for a new fire. Maya paced back and forth, while I fidgeted, unable to relax. We need to head out again, I said. Liam's still out there. Where would we even look? Maya asked. I don't know, anywhere. I shone my flashlight in the opposite direction from where Liam had disappeared. Then I gasped. I saw a pair of legs sticking out from behind a tree. Liam's legs. My heart leaped. I ran towards him, calling his name. I rounded the tree and there he was, alive, seemingly unharmed. Liam, I cried, kneeling beside him. But he didn't respond. He just stared blankly upwards, his arms folded across his chest, his hands clutching a bundle of sticks. Liam, Maya called. Are you all right? What's wrong with him? Noah whispered. Liam didn't move, didn't even blink. This must be part of the prank, Maya muttered. I glared at her. Weren't you worried just now? She looked confused. None of us were thinking straight. We have to get out of here, Noah said, his voice shaking. But the project, Maya started. Look, I said. We'll come back for the equipment. Maybe we'll even continue with the project. But right now we need to get Liam some help. He's not okay. How do we get him back to the truck? Noah asked. Liam was a big guy. There was no way we could carry him. We'll take an arm each and drag him, I said. Maya, you guide us. Take Liam's flashlight, the brightest one, and look for his markings. Maya, for once, did as she was told. She even set down the camera. We set off, Noah and I groaning as we pulled Liam through the undergrowth. We were facing away from Maya, so we had to rely on her to guide us. The darkness felt heavier now, like it was closing in. Then Noah yelled. I looked over and saw it, a tall, thin figure with pale skin and unnaturally long limbs. It was standing just beyond the reach of our lights, its twisted mouth open in a silent scream. It raised a long, bony arm towards us. Noah and I screamed and started running, dragging Liam with us. What happened? Maya gasped, shining the flashlight in our faces. There's something out there. Noah shrieked. Run. Was it the Woodwick Walker? I didn't know, but the fact that we had both looked at it and were still alive suggested maybe not. We scrambled through the woods, expecting to see the creature at any moment. Suddenly, the wind stopped. The rustling leaves, the creaking branches all fell silent. We froze. I felt a chill run down my spine. Noah and I exchanged terrified glances. Then we heard it, the creaking wood. Don't look at him, I hissed. Noah squeezed his eyes shut. I looked down at Liam. He was still staring blankly upwards. I clapped my hands over his eyes, then closed my own. The whispering and the creaking grew louder. I strained to understand the words, but I couldn't. Then Maya spoke. Oh, this is ridiculous. I'm not playing this stupid game anymore. Maya, quiet, I whispered. She laughed. Look at you two, with your eyes closed. You're grown men, give me a break. There's nothing. She stopped abruptly. Her breathing quickened. I heard a thud. She had dropped the flashlight. Then, silence. I opened my eyes. Maya was gone. She's gone. Noah whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my throat tight. She's gone. We stood there for a moment, the silence pressing in on us. The darkness seemed to have deepened, the trees looming over us like silent predators. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. We had lost Liam, and now Maya. We were alone in this godforsaken forest, with something terrifying lurking in the shadows. We have to get out of here, Noah said, his voice shaking. No. I nodded, my mind racing. We had to get back to the truck, but how? We were miles from the clearing, and the forest was a maze in the darkness. We couldn't even see the markings Liam had made on the trees. We need a light, I said, my voice hoarse. Liam's flashlight is gone. Noah fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small pen light. It was barely stronger than a firefly, but it was better than nothing. We started walking, Noah leading the way, his light casting a feeble glow on the path ahead. We stumbled through the undergrowth, our hearts pounding in our chests. Every creak and groan of the trees sent shivers down our spines. We kept expecting to see that creature again, its pale limbs reaching for us, its twisted face contorted in a silent scream. But the forest remained silent, except for the sound of our own ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves under our feet. The silence was almost worse than the creature. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, filled with unseen dangers. After what felt like hours, we saw a faint glow in the distance. We quickened our pace, our hopes rising. As we got closer, we realized it was the clearing, and the headlights of Liam's truck were shining like beacons in the darkness. We burst out of the trees, gasping for breath. We had made it. We were safe. But the relief was short-lived. As we approached the truck, we saw Liam and Maya lying in the back, their eyes blank, their bodies still. They were clutching bundles of sticks to their chests. "Noah," Noah whispered, his voice breaking. I felt a surge of anger. "Damn it, Liam. What have you done?" We climbed into the truck, Noah taking the driver's seat. I sat beside him, my mind numb. We had to get out of there, get Liam and Maya to a hospital. But as Noah turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, but nothing. The engine wouldn't start. "What the hell?" Noah muttered, hitting the dashboard in frustration. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. We were stranded. We got out of the truck and checked under the hood, but neither of us knew anything about cars. We were helpless. As we stood there, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees. The forest was still dark, but the shadows were less menacing now. We could see the outlines of the trees, the twisted branches reaching up like skeletal fingers. Then we heard it. The creaking. It was closer this time, louder. It seemed to be coming from all around us. "Don't look," I whispered, my voice trembling. Noah nodded, his eyes wide with fear. We stood there, frozen, as the creaking grew louder. We could hear the whispering now, the guttural sounds that seemed to slither into our minds. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see the creature in my mind's eye. It was tall and thin, with pale, almost translucent skin. Its limbs were long and slender, ending in sharp claws. Its face was a grotesque mask of pain, its mouth twisted into a silent scream. The creaking stopped. We held our breath listening. Then a voice, a raspy, whispering voice that seemed to come from the very air around us. "You looked up." I opened my eyes. The creature was standing in front of us, its pale face inches from mine. Its eyes were black pits, devoid of any light or emotion. I screamed and stumbled back, tripping over a tree root. I fell to the ground, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature leaned over me, its face contorted in a horrifying grin. Its breath was cold and fetid, like the smell of decay. "You look ya," it whispered again, its voice a chilling rasp. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. I opened my eyes cautiously. The creature was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking. Noah was standing beside me, his face pale. "It's gone," he whispered. We looked around, but there was no sign of the creature. The forest was silent again, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. We ran to the truck and piled in. This time, the engine started without a hitch. We sped away from the clearing, not stopping until we reached the highway. We never looked back. We never spoke about what happened in the weeping woods. We just tried to forget. But we couldn't. The nightmares continued. The creaking wood, the whispering voices, the pale, faceless creature. It haunted our dreams, a constant reminder of the horror we had witnessed. Liam and Maya remained in a catatonic state, their minds trapped in the weeping woods. No, and I tried to move on, but the experience had changed us. We were no longer the carefree students we had been before. We were haunted, broken, and we knew that the weeping woods would never let us go. The hospital was a blur. Doctors, nurses, test scans, the works. Nothing made sense. Liam and Maya were unresponsive, their eyes blank, their bodies still. The doctors called it catatonia, said they might snap out of it, might not. It was like they were trapped somewhere, their minds lost in the woods. Noah and I were in shock. We barely spoke. We just went through the motions, answering questions, signing forms, trying to make sense of the senseless. Eventually, we were allowed to see Liam and Maya. They were lying in hospital beds, hooked up to machines, their faces pale and drawn. I held Liam's hand, hoping he could feel my presence, hoping he could hear me. "Liam, it's me," I whispered. "Please come back to us." But there was no response. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. We left the hospital, feeling numb and defeated. We drove back to our town in silence, the weight of what we had experienced pressing down on us. The next few days were a blur. We went to classes, tried to focus on our studies, but it was impossible. The weeping woods haunted our every waking moment. We saw pale limbs in the shadows, heard creaking wood in the wind. We jumped at every sudden noise, our hearts pounding in our chests. We tried to talk about it, but the words wouldn't come. How could we explain the unexplainable? How could we describe the horror we had witnessed? We drifted apart, each of us lost in our own private hell. Noah dropped out of college and moved back home. I finished my degree, but my heart wasn't in it. I lost my passion for social sciences, for learning, for life itself. I got a job, a mindless, soul-crushing job that paid the bills. I moved to a town far away from any forests, a town where the only trees were the neatly trimmed ones lining the streets. I even cut down all the bushes in my yard, just to be safe. But the weeping woods still haunted me. I saw pale limbs in the shadows of my apartment, heard creaking wood in the silence of the night. I couldn't escape the memories, the fear, the guilt. Why had I survived? Why had Liam and Maya been taken? What had we done to deserve such a fate? The questions tortured me day and night. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I was a shell of my former self, a ghost haunting my own life. One day, I decided to visit Liam and Maya. They were still in the special care facility, their condition unchanged. They lay in their beds, their eyes blank, their bodies still. They were like living statues, frozen in time. I sat beside Liam's bed, holding his hand. I told him about my life, about my struggles, about my guilt. I told him how sorry I was, how I wished I could have done things differently. But there was no response. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. I left the facility, feeling more hopeless than ever. I walked aimlessly through the streets, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. As I passed a park, I saw a group of children playing on the swings. They were laughing and shouting, their faces filled with joy. I watched them for a while, a pang of longing in my heart. I remembered a time when I was carefree and happy, a time before the weeping woods, a time when I believed in the goodness of the world. But that time was gone, lost forever in the darkness of the forest. I continued walking, my head bowed, my shoulders slumped. I felt a deep sense of despair, a feeling that I would never be happy again. Then I heard a voice. "Excuse me." I looked up. A young woman was standing in front of me, a concerned expression on her face. "Are you all right?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "You seem lost," she said gently. I nodded, unable to speak. "Can I help you?" she asked. I looked at her, my eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," I whispered. She smiled kindly. "It's okay," she said. "Sometimes we all need a little help." She took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Come with me," she said. "Let's find somewhere to talk." I followed her, my heart filled with a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal, to find peace after the weeping woods. Maybe, with help, I could finally escape the darkness and find my way back to the light. It's been years since that night in the weeping woods. Years of therapy, medication, and countless sleepless nights. The nightmares have faded, but the memories remain sharp and clear as ever. Liam and Maya are still in that facility. I visit them every now and then, hoping for a miracle, but they remain unchanged, lost in their own silent worlds, clutching their bundles of sticks. Noah and I reconnected a few years ago. It was awkward at first, the unspoken trauma hanging heavy between us. But we talked, slowly and carefully, sharing our experiences, our fears, our guilt. It helped, knowing we weren't alone. We both still struggle with what happened. The fear of the dark, the aversion to forests, the constant vigilance for anything out of the ordinary. But we're coping, finding ways to live with the scars. I still think about that night often. I think about the choices we made, the things we could have done differently. I think about Liam, Maya, and Tina, their lives forever altered by that cursed place. But I also think about the kindness of strangers, the hope that flickered in the darkness. I think about the young woman in the park, her gentle smile, her offer of help. And I realize that even in the face of unimaginable horror, there is still light to be found. There is still hope for healing, for finding peace, for living a life worth living. The weeping woods may have taken a part of me, but it didn't take all of me. I'm still here, still fighting, still searching for my way back to the light. And I know, deep down, that I will find it. Look, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't want to go on this trip. The whole idea of booking a remote cabin at some Alaskan ski resort in the middle of nowhere, during the off-season, no less, was all Ethan's crazy idea. He'd pitched it to the group with the kind of over-the-top enthusiasm that makes it impossible to say no without seeming like a total downer. "Come on, Alex," he'd said, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "It'll be an adventure, a break from the grind." It sounded good in theory. Snow-covered slopes, a roaring fireplace, and the kind of isolation that promised nothing but peace and quiet. But as our shuttle wound its way up the icy mountain road, past dense forests and sheer cliffs that dropped off into nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole trip was a big mistake. The cabin came into view just as the sun started to dip behind the mountains, casting long, jagged shadows over the snow. It wasn't anything like the glossy photos online. The wooden exterior was weathered and gray, the kind of gray that comes from years of neglect. A single porch light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the gloom. "Home sweet home," Ethan said, hopping out of the shuttle with his usual boundless energy. Mason and Cole followed, each lugging their bags through the slush, while I lingered behind, staring up at the cabin. Something about it felt off, like it was holding its breath, waiting for us to cross the threshold. Our driver, a gruff man in his late 50s, unloaded our gear in silence. As he handed me my bag, he muttered under his breath, "Be careful out here. Weather can change fast." I thanked him, but he didn't stick around for small talk. He climbed back into the shuttle, his tires crunching at the ice as he drove off, leaving us alone with the cabin and the oppressive quiet of the mountains. The door creaked open like something out of a horror movie as we stepped inside. The air was colder than I'd expected, and it carried the faint scent of damp wood and something metallic like old pipes. The main room was small but cozy enough, with a stone fireplace on one side and a few mismatched pieces of furniture scattered around. A narrow hallway led to the bedrooms and a single bathroom. "Not bad," Ethan said, tossing his bag onto the worn-out couch. "Definitely got that rustic charm." Mason, ever the practical one, wandered toward the kitchen. "Do we have running water?" Cole, always eager to keep the peace, chimed in. "It's not so bad. A little cold, but it's got character." I wasn't convinced. Something about the cabin felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way the windows seemed too dark, even though the curtains were open, or the faint creak of the floorboards, as if the place were shifting under its own weight. Then there was him. He appeared out of nowhere, stepping into the room from the hallway like a shadow materializing from the walls. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and eyes that darted around like they were trying to take in everything at once. He wore a heavy sweater and jeans that looked a size too big for him. "You must be the group for Cabin 3, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "I'm Silas, the caretaker." "He-man," Ethan said, offering his usual friendly smile. "Appreciate you getting this place ready for us." Silas didn't respond right away. His eyes lingered on each of us, as if he were sizing us up. When his gaze settled on me, I felt an uncomfortable pressure. Like he could see something in me that I didn't want him to see. "Let me know if you need anything," he said finally. "I'll be staying in the caretaker's room at the end of the hall. Don't go in there. It's policy." "Of course," Cole said quickly, his politeness almost desperate. "We'll let you do your thing." Silas nodded and disappeared back into the hallway. The air felt heavier in his absence, like he'd taken something with him when he left. "Creepy," Ethan muttered. Did anyone else feel like he was staring into their soul? "He's probably just not used to company," Mason said, though even he sounded uncertain. "Let's unpack and get settled. We'll hit the slopes tomorrow." We spent the evening trying to make the cabin feel like home. Ethan cranked up the old heater, which groaned in protest before sputtering to life. Mason checked the fireplace, making sure it was safe to use. Cole rummaged through the kitchen cabinets, finding mismatched plates and a single cast iron pan that looked older than all of us combined. I busied myself with unpacking in one of the small bedrooms. The walls were thin, and I could hear the others talking and laughing in the main room. Their voices were a comfort, cutting through the unsettling quiet that seemed to creep in whenever the conversation lagged. But as I tucked my bag under the bed, I noticed something strange. The floorboards near the far wall were slightly raised, as if something had been pried up and poorly replaced. I knelt down, running my fingers over the uneven wood. It didn't feel loose, but it was definitely out of place. "Alex, you coming?" Ethan's voice broke my focus. I straightened up quickly, brushing off the unease. "Yeah, be right there." We stayed up late, drinking cheap beer and talking about nothing in particular. The cabin was warmer now, the fire crackling in the hearth, and for a while, I let myself relax. Maybe I was overthinking things. It was just an old cabin, after all, and Silas was just a weird dude. Not everyone was cut out for small talk. By the time we called it a night, the storm had picked up. The wind howled against the windows, and the trees outside groaned under the weight of the snow. I climbed into bed, pulling the blankets tight around me, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, felt amplified in the dark. At some point in the night, I heard it treat the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, moving from one end to the other. I told myself it was just Silas, but the thought didn't bring much comfort. I lay there, still, staring at the ceiling until the footsteps faded and the cabin fell silent again. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the landscape blanketed in fresh snow. Ethan was the first to wake, his usual energy undimmed by the restless night. "Let's hit the slopes," he said, practically bouncing as he pulled on his gear. Mason and Cole were slower to get moving, but eventually we all bundled up and headed outside. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your skin but feels invigorating. As we made our way to the ski lift, I glanced back at the cabin. Silas stood in the window, watching us. His face was pale and expressionless, and for a moment I thought I saw his lips move, as if he were speaking to someone. But when I blinked, he was gone. Something about the way the cabin loomed against the mountains made my stomach twist. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stepped into something we didn't understand, and I was starting to think we wouldn't leave the same way we'd come. The morning sun, pale and hesitant, stretched across the snow, painting the world in shades of cold silver. We'd barely made it to the slopes before Ethan was bounding ahead, his energy undeterred by the biting wind. Mason, Cole, and I followed at a slower pace, lugging our gear while trying to ignore the strange weight that still hung over us from the cabin. Cole broke the silence. "Do you think Silas is okay?" His voice was soft, almost drowned out by the crunch of snow beneath our boots. "Define okay," Mason said. He wasn't one to mince words. "The guy's definitely odd, but maybe he's just one of those loner types, you know. Lives out here for the solitude. Solitude doesn't mean acting like a total weirdo." Ethan chimed in from ahead, turning to walk backward so he could face us. "Did you see the way he watched us last night? Like we were trespassing in his personal playground." "He is the caretaker," I pointed out. "Technically, this is his turf, Don." Ethan shrugged and turned back around. "Doesn't mean I have to like it." The ski lift creaked and groaned as it carried us up the slope, its rhythmic squeaking adding to the unease I couldn't shake. The resort itself was nearly deserted, and the blanket of fresh snow muffled every sound, making the world feel eerily still. I could see only a handful of other skiers in the distance, their colorful jackets mirrored dots against the endless white. "Kind of quiet for a ski resort," Cole muttered, echoing my thoughts. "It's the off-season," Mason replied, adjusting his goggles. "Probably why we got the cabin for so cheap. Doesn't explain why it feels like we're the last people on Earth," I said, my breath fogging in the cold air. As we reached the top, the view stretched out before us, vast, untouched snowfields framed by jagged peaks. For a moment, the sheer beauty of it all made me forget my unease. Ethan was already strapping on his skis, grinning like a kid let loose on Christmas morning. "Race you to the bottom," he called, and before any of us could answer, he was off, carving a wild path down the slope. Cole sighed, shaking his head. "He's going to break something one of these days." "Let's hope it's not today," Mason said. Then he turned to me. "Ready?" I nodded, but as I adjusted my boots, I caught a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. Turning my head, I saw a figure standing among the trees below, a lone silhouette, dark against the snow. Even from this distance, I knew who it was. Silas. He was standing perfectly still, watching us. I couldn't see his face, but the way he stood, rigid and unyielding, made my stomach twist. Why was he here? Had he followed us? "Alex, you good?" Mason's voice snapped me out of it. I turned back to him, forcing a smile. "Yeah, let's go." We pushed off, gliding down the slope after Ethan. The wind stung my face, and the sound of my skis cutting through the snow filled my ears. But no matter how fast I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By the time we returned to the cabin, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Ethan burst through the door first, still buzzing with energy. "That was incredible. Did you see that jump I hit?" "Nailed it. Barely," Mason said, tossing his gloves onto the counter. "You're lucky you didn't wipe out." Cole laughed softly as he hung his coat by the door. "I thought for sure you were going to eat it." I didn't join in the banter. My eyes were drawn to the storage room at the far end of the hall. Something about it felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint why. While the others were unpacking, I slipped inside. The room was small, lined with shelves stocked with firewood, old tools, and miscellaneous supplies. Our ski gear was piled neatly in the corner, exactly where we'd left it. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. The straps on Cole's bag were undone, dangling loosely, like someone had been rifling through it. "Guz," I called out, my voice tight. Cole appeared in the doorway a moment later. "What's up?" I gestured to his bag. "Did you leave it like this?" He frowned, stepping inside to take a closer look. "No, I'm pretty sure I fastened it." Mason and Ethan joined us, the air in the room suddenly tense. "Maybe it came loose on its own," Ethan offered, though even he didn't sound convinced. Mason knelt down, inspecting the bag with his usual meticulousness. "Doesn't look like it. This wasn't an accident. Should Silas have?" Cole trailed off, his face pale. "Why would he?" Mason stood, brushing snow off his pants. "He doesn't strike me as the petty thief type, but someone definitely moved it." A heavy silence settled over us, broken only by the faint creak of the cabin settling. Finally, Ethan clapped his hands together, forcing a grin. "All right, let's not freak out over nothing. It's probably just one of us forgetting. No big deal." But it was a big deal. We all knew it. Dinner was a quiet affair. Mason cooked while Ethan tried to lighten the mood with jokes that fell flat. Cole barely touched his food, and I couldn't stop glancing toward the hallway, half expecting Silas to appear at any moment. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Mason spoke up. "Did anyone notice the footprints outside this morning?" "What footprints?" Ethan asked, his tone worried. Mason set his fork down, his expression serious. "When I stepped out to check the weather, I saw tracks leading away from the cabin, but they didn't come back." "Maybe it was Silas," Cole suggested. "Maybe." Mason didn't sound convinced. "But they didn't lead toward his room. They went into the woods." No one had a response to that. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and for the first time, I felt genuinely trapped. The vast wilderness that had seemed so beautiful earlier now felt like a prison, its silence oppressive. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Ethan tripped over something in the hallway. "What the?" We all turned to see him holding up a small, folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, as if it had been tucked away somewhere for a long time. He unfolded it, revealing a single line scrawled in jagged handwriting: "Leave while you can." Cole's breath hitched. Mason grabbed the note, studying it closely. "This isn't fresh. The paper's old. Could have been left here years ago. Or it could have been Silas," Ethan said, his voice tight, trying to scare us. I glanced toward the far end of the hall, where the door to Silas's room was closed. The silence from behind it was deafening, like a void that swallowed all sound. "We should talk to him," Cole whispered. "Ask him if he knows anything." "No." Mason's tone was firm. "Not yet. Let's keep an eye on things and see if it gets worse." "Worse than this?" Ethan asked, waving the note for emphasis. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I knew was that the unease that had been gnawing at me since we arrived was no longer just a feeling. It was real, and it was getting harder to ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint creaks and groans, like footsteps pacing outside my door. I told myself it was just the wind, the old wood shifting under the weight of the storm. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with this place, and I had a sinking feeling we'd only just scratched the surface. The next morning, I woke to a low grinding sound, that seemed to echo through the cabin. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just the wind rattling the wood. But as the sound persisted, metal against metal, deliberate and steady, I knew better. Dragging myself out of bed, I glanced at the clock, 7:02 a.m., too early for the sun to provide much warmth, and judging by the frost on the windows, the temperature had dropped further overnight. I quickly pulled on a hoodie and stepped into the hallway. It was quiet now, the kind of silence that wasn't reassuring but oppressive. Mason was already in the main room, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He nodded toward the back of the cabin. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my throat dry. "What was it?" "Not sure," he said. Sounded like it came from Silas's room. Cole joined us a moment later, rubbing his arms for warmth. "Do you think he's working on something? I mean, he is the caretaker, right?" "Maybe," Mason said, though he didn't sound convinced. By the time Ethan finally dragged himself out of bed, the tension in the cabin had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Mason suggested we spend the day hiking around the nearby trails, a way to keep ourselves occupied and shake off the strange energy that seemed to hang over us. The trails were beautiful, blanketed in fresh snow. The cold air was sharp but invigorating, and for a while, it felt like we'd escaped whatever was happening in the cabin. Ethan was his usual exuberant self, racing ahead and pretending to get lost while Cole stuck close to Mason, chatting quietly. But even out here, I couldn't relax. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a branch bending, a shadow shifting. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just endless white and the stillness of the trees. At one point, Ethan stopped abruptly, pointing at the ground. "Look." We all gathered around him, staring at the faint impression in the snow. It was a footprint, larger than any of ours and strangely elongated, as if the person, or thing, that left it had been wearing oversized boots. The tracks led deeper into the forest, toward a dense thicket of pines. Cole shivered. "Maybe it's a hunter, in the off-season," Mason replied, doubtful. Ethan grinned, though there was an edge to it. "Let's follow it." "No," I said quickly, the word out of my mouth before I could stop myself. "We don't know who or what made that." He rolled his eyes. "Come on, Alex, what's the worst that could happen?" "I don't know," I shot back, and I don't want to find out. Mason stepped between us, his voice calm but firm. "Alex is right. Let's stick to the main trail. We don't want to get lost out here." Ethan muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. As we continued hiking, the footprint lingered in the back of my mind, an unanswered question that made my skin crawl. By the time we returned to the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the snow. Silas's room door was still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, felt like a signal. Cole went straight to the kitchen to make tea, while Ethan flopped onto the couch, scrolling through his phone. Mason, ever the investigator, disappeared into the storage room. I followed him, curious. The room was exactly as we'd left it, but Mason was crouched by the far wall, examining something on the floor. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. He gestured to a corner where the wood was slightly discolored. "Looks like water damage, but..." He trailed off, pressing his ear to the floor. A moment later, he knocked lightly, and the sound that came back was hollow. I frowned. "There's a space under there." "Maybe." He straightened up, his brow furrowed. "Could be a crawl space or a storage area, but if that's the case, why wouldn't Silas mention it?" "Because he doesn't want us to know," I said, the words out before I could stop myself. Mason glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Let's not jump to conclusions, but it's worth keeping in mind." After dinner, Ethan finally had enough of the tension. He slammed his fork onto the table, startling all of us. Okay, seriously, what's the deal with Silas? The guy barely talks, he's creeping us out, and now we're finding footprints and secret crawl spaces. I say we confront him. No, Mason said sharply. Not yet. We don't know enough. Then what do you suggest? Ethan snapped. We just sit here and wait for something else weird to happen. Why, stay calm, Mason replied. We keep an eye on things, gather information. If we push him too hard, we could make things worse. And what if he's dangerous? Cole whispered. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. We'll handle it, Mason said finally, his voice steady. Together. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the creak of the cabin, the faint hum of the heater, felt like a warning. At some point, I heard movement in the hallway, soft and deliberate. I sat up, my heart pounding, and strained to listen. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, but after a few agonizing moments, they moved on. I wanted to believe it was just Silas making his rounds, but the way the steps paused, paced at each door, made my skin crawl. Morning arrived with a pale gray sky that offered no reprieve from the cold. The cabin, though small and cluttered with evidence of its age, had never felt more imposing. Every creak of the wood, every muted whistle of wind through the windows, seemed like a message we weren't equipped to understand. By now, none of us could ignore the growing tension. The strange footprints, the odd noises at night, Silas's looming presence. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle we were too afraid to solve. But Mason was the first to act. We need to check his room, he announced as we huddled in the kitchen. The coffee pot sputtered weakly, the smell of stale grounds doing little to calm our nerves. What? Cole looked up from his mug, his expression a mix of surprise and fear. His room, Mason repeated. Silas is hiding something. The guest logs, the way he watches us, the note. It's all too deliberate. We can't just wait for the next thing to happen. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. And what if he catches us? He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who just let that slide. Mason shrugged, his tone calm but resolute. Then we'll deal with it. I don't like sneaking around either, but I like being kept in the dark even less. I couldn't disagree. The unease I'd felt since we arrived had grown into something sharper, more urgent. Whatever Silas was up to, it was becoming clear that we weren't safe. Fine, Ethan said finally. But if he comes back while we're in there, I'm throwing you under the bus. Silas's room was at the far end of the hallway, the door slightly warped from years of use. For someone who supposedly lived here full-time, his presence was strangely invisible. No shoes left out, no jacket hanging in the entryway. No signs that anyone but us had been using the kitchen or bathroom. Mason knelt in front of the door, a thin metal ruler in his hands. He'd found it in the maintenance closet earlier, claiming it could work as a makeshift lockpick. I stood behind him, my breath fogging in the cold air as I kept watch for any sign of Silas. Almost. Got it, Mason muttered, his fingers deftly working the ruler. The lock clicked. My stomach dropped. Mason pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like they were protesting our intrusion. The room was surprisingly sparse. Just a bed with an old quilt, a wooden chair, and a small dresser. There were no personal items, no photographs, no books. It was as if the space had been stripped of any identity. But then we saw the chest. It was tucked beneath the bed, its dark wood almost blending into the shadows. Mason dragged it out, and Ethan knelt beside him, running his hands over the iron latch. Locked, of course, Ethan said. Got any more tricks up your sleeve? Mason didn't answer. He stood, scanning the room until his eyes landed on a rusty crowbar leaning against the wall near the dresser. This should work. Wait, Cole said, his voice trembling. What if whatever's in there isn't meant for us to see? Mason turned to him, his expression unreadable. That's exactly why we need to see it. The first blow of the crowbar splintered the wood around the latch. The sound echoed in the small room, making me flinch. Mason struck again, and this time the chest popped open with a loud snap. Inside were a few faded papers, a bundle of frayed rope, and an old radio with its wires meticulously cut. But it was the papers that caught my attention. Mason pulled them out, spreading them on the bed. What is this? Ethan asked, leaning over to read. The papers were guest records, much older than the ones we'd found in the maintenance closet. Most of the names were crossed out, with notes scrawled in the margins canceled, no show, rebooked. But it was the last page that stopped us cold. Our names were listed, along with the date we'd arrived. Next to it, written in the same jagged handwriting as the note we'd found in the hallway, was a single word: stay. What the hell does that mean? Ethan demanded, his voice rising. Mason shook his head. I don't know, but this isn't just a coincidence. He knew we were coming. He planned for us. Cole was pale, his hands gripping the back of the chair. Planned what? To scare us? To hurt us? Maybe both, Mason said grimly. We need to leave. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. And how do you suggest we do that? We're snowed in, there's no cell service, and the shuttle isn't coming back for days. We'll figure something out, Mason said. But staying here isn't an option. Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed through the cabin. It came from the main room. He's back, Cole gasped, his eyes wide. We scrambled out of Silas's room, leaving the chest and its contents behind. The main room was empty, but the front door was wide open, snow blowing in and dusting the floor. Did he just leave? Ethan whispered. Maybe he heard us, I said. Maybe he knows, Mason said. He grabbed the crowbar, his knuckles white. We need to lock this place down. If he comes back. The lights flickered and went out. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Cole fumbled with his phone, turning on the flashlight. The weak beam cutting through the gloom. Stay together, Mason ordered. We'll check the generator. The generator was in a small shed behind the cabin, accessible through a narrow path lined with trees. The snowstorm had eased, but the wind still howled, biting at my face as we trudged outside. The shed door was ajar, the padlock hanging loose. Mason pushed it open cautiously, his flashlight sweeping over the machinery inside. The generator had been deliberately tampered with, wires yanked free, parts scattered across the floor. Looks like he didn't want us to have power, Mason muttered. Why is he doing this? Cole whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. I don't know, Mason said. But whatever his reason, he's escalating. We need to be ready. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and paranoia. Every noise, every shadow, felt like a threat. We took turns keeping watch. The crowbar and a kitchen knife our only weapons. But Silas didn't return. By dawn, the storm had cleared, leaving the landscape eerily quiet. Mason worked on the radio, trying to reconnect the wires. Ethan kept an eye on the windows, while Cole sat beside me, his hands trembling. I don't think I can do this, Cole admitted. I want to go home. We all do, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, Mason cursed under his breath. Got it. The radio crackled to life, a garbled voice cutting through the static. Cabin 3 emergency. This is Cabin 3, Mason said quickly. We need help. We're snowed in and someone's trying to. The line went dead. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Ethan said what we were all thinking. He cut the power. What if he's listening to the radio too? Before Mason could answer, a sound came from the hallway. The unmistakable creak of a door opening. Silas was still here. and he wasn't alone. The creak of the door stopped us cold. The cabin, already oppressive in its silence, felt suffocating as the sound echoed down the hallway. We froze, each of us holding our breath as we strained to hear the faintest hint of movement. Then, footsteps. Deliberate, heavy, approaching. Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar, his knuckles white. Cole backed into the corner of the room, his phone flashlight trembling in his hand. Mason motioned for us to stay quiet, his finger to his lips, but the fear in his eyes was impossible to miss. The footsteps stopped just outside the room where we huddled. For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. No sound, no movement, just the suffocating weight of our own terror. And then, the doorknob turned. "Move," Mason hissed, shoving us toward the opposite door that led into the adjacent hallway. We stumbled through just as the main door creaked open behind us. I caught a glimpse of a shadow, a figure stepping into the room, but Mason didn't let me look back. We ran. The hallway felt endless, each step echoing like gunfire against the wood, paneled walls. The faint glow of Cole's flashlight bobbed erratically, casting distorted shadows that made the space feel alive and hostile. Behind us, the sound of footsteps resumed. Faster now, more deliberate. "This way." Ethan barked, leading us into the storage room at the end of the hall. He slammed the door shut and jammed the crowbar against the handle. The footsteps stopped again, just outside. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a low, guttural voice called out, muffled through the door. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was unmistakably Silas's, but there was something different about it now. An edge of fury mixed with desperation. He didn't pound on the door or try to force his way in. He just stood there, the silence more unnerving than any threat. Cole whimpered, his back pressed against the far wall. What does he want? Why won't he just leave us alone? Mason knelt beside the door, his ear pressed against it. "I don't think he's trying to scare us anymore. I think he's trying to keep us here." Ethan frowned. "Why? What's he hiding?" "I don't know," Mason said. "But we're not going to find out by sitting here." The flashlight beam caught something on the floor. A faint seam in the wood, barely noticeable. Mason knelt down, running his fingers along the edge until he found a small groove. It was the crawl space he'd suspected earlier, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. "Help me," he said, gesturing to Ethan. Together, they pried the board free, revealing a dark, narrow space below. The smell of damp earth wafted up, cold and unwelcoming. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan muttered. "It's our only chance," Mason said. "We don't know how long that door will hold, and we can't wait for him to make the next move." One by one, we lowered ourselves into the crawl space. The air was damp and suffocating, the dirt floor uneven beneath our feet. Cole's flashlight cast long, eerie shadows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness. Mason led the way, his movements cautious but deliberate. The space was cramped, forcing us to stoop as we moved forward. The sound of our breathing and shuffling echoed unnaturally, making it impossible to tell how far we'd gone. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the end of the crawl space, a narrow wooden panel that seemed to lead outside. Mason pressed against it, and it gave way with a low groan, revealing the snow-covered ground beyond. We scrambled out, the cold air biting at our skin. The cabin loomed behind us, its dark silhouette imposing against the gray sky, but we didn't have time to catch our breath. We had to keep moving. The snow was deep, making it difficult to run. Cole stumbled, and Ethan hauled him to his feet without a word. Mason let a word, his focus on the faint trail that led toward the main road. "Where are we going?" Ethan panted. "Anywhere but here," Mason replied. "We just need to put as much distance as we can between us and the cabin." We hadn't gone far when we heard it. the sound of a snowmobile engine roaring to life. I glanced back and saw him, Silas, perched on the snowmobile, his face a mask of fury. He didn't hesitate. The machine lurched forward, the headlights cutting through the snow as he bore down on us. "Run!" Mason shouted. The next moments were a blur of chaos. The snowmobile engine roared behind us, growing louder with each passing second. The cold air burned my lungs, and my legs ashed with every step. But I couldn't step. None of us could. Ethan veered off to the side, grabbing a large branch from the ground. As the snowmobile drew closer, he swung it with all his might, striking the front of the vehicle. The impact sent Silas tumbling into the snow. "Go," Ethan yelled, waving us forward. "I'll hold him off, Kno." Cole cried, but Mason grabbed his arm and pulled him along. We didn't look back. By the time we reached the main road, the snowmobile engine had gone silent. I didn't know if Ethan was okay, and we didn't have time to find out. Mason spotted a snowplow in the distance, a faint orange light cutting through the gray. He waved his arms frantically, shouting until the driver spotted us. The plow came to a halt, and an older man leaned out of the cab, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What are you kids doing out here?" he asked. "This area is supposed to be closed." "Help us," Mason said, his voice hoarse. "There's someone after us." The driver didn't need convincing. He ushered us into the cab, cranking up the heater as we tried to explain what had happened. He radioed for backup, and within minutes, a second vehicle arrived, this one carrying 2 uniformed officers. The officers listened intently as we recounted the events at the cabin. Their expressions grew darker with every detail. "You said his name was Silas?" one of them asked. "Yes," Mason said. "He's the caretaker." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "That's impossible. Silas was fired months ago. The new caretaker hasn't even started yet." We didn't return to the cabin. The officers assured us they'd investigate, but they advised us to stay in town until the shuttle service resumed. Ethan arrived at the station hours later, battered but alive. He'd managed to knock Silas unconscious long enough to escape. We never learned what happened to Silas. The officers found the cabin empty, the snowmobile abandoned near the woods. The guest logs and papers we'd found were gone, leaving no evidence of the strange, deliberate way our stay had been orchestrated. But I didn't need proof. I knew what we'd experienced was real. As we boarded the shuttle back to civilization, I couldn't help but glance at the mountains one last time. The cabin was hidden somewhere among them, a dark memory I'd never escape. We survived, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Silas hadn't been acting alone, that there was something or someone still out there, watching and waiting. The call came in just as the sun was starting to peek over the mountains. "Jake, this is base. You copy?" I grabbed the radio, my coffee still in my hand. "This is Jake." "Go ahead." "Sarah." Sarah hardly ever called this early unless it was urgent. "We've got a missing person, Alex Reed. His emergency beacon went off around 300 a.m. near Mount Chester. Then it went dead." My stomach tightened. Alex. He had been warned about the restricted areas so many times. Did he call back after? Negative. His car's at the Thunder Lake Park trailhead. The cops found his logbook. Something about following the wolf's path to the treasure. Ring any bells? I rubbed my eyes. The last time I saw Alex was 3 days ago in the visitor center parking lot. "Yeah," I said, recalling our last encounter. "Jake, you need to hear this," Alex had said, holding up a beat-up journal. "The containers, the maps, the symbols. It all points to the gulch. Have you ever seen anything like this?" "Not yet," I replied, grabbing my gear from my locker. "Weather station says clouds are rolling in. We've got maybe 6 hours before the storm hits us." "Great, just great." I muttered now to Sarah, "I'm heading out. I'll keep you posted on Channel 3. I gathered my gear, making sure I had everything for a few days in the wilderness. I was worried but trying not to panic. My brother had gone down these conspiracy rabbit holes before, and he always came out okay. But this time felt different. His words echoed in my mind. The wolves know, Jake. They're guarding something. I've seen their eyes in the dark. They're not normal wolves. The drive to Thunder Lake Trailhead took under an hour. I found Alex's Jeep in the lot. Inside, I saw scattered maps, empty energy drink cans, and his tablet displaying a topo map of Mount Chester. Dispatch, this is Jake. I'm at the vehicle, starting track west toward the gulch. Copy that. Be advised, we've had reports of increased wolf activity in that area in the past week. Of course, I thought, because this day wasn't already complicated enough. The trail was easy to follow at first, but then Alex had taken a sharp left, following a game trail into the brush. Just like him, I thought. Always taking the most direct route, even if it was the hardest and most dangerous. I followed his tracks for another half hour. He was moving fast, not taking his time to navigate safely. Several times, I had to double back where he'd gone down steep hills. There were signs of his reckless passage everywhere. A wolf howled in the distance, not that far off. I checked my watch, 8:45 a.m. Dispatch, I've got activity in Sector 7. Any rangers nearby? Only static. I tried again and again. Nothing. The trail got even more treacherous. Alex's footprints were more recent here. I was getting closer, maybe just a few hours behind him. Another wolf howled, this one answered by several more from all directions. I took my rifle off my shoulder and held it ready. Then I saw something strange up ahead. Alex, I called out. Alex Reed. I heard a stick break behind me. I turned and saw a pair of glowing eyes. A massive wolf stepped into view, its eyes reflecting the dim light. It was huge, reaching up to my waist, with dark gray fur. The creature and I stared at each other. Base, this is Jake. My voice trailed off. The radio at my hip was no longer making any sound. No static, nothing. The wolf cocked its head, as if confused. The rest of the pack emerged from the fog behind it, standing in perfect formation. Then I heard Alex's voice from above. Jake, are you there? You have to see this. They showed me something. Something that can't be real, Bob. The alpha wolf took a step forward. I knew that if I followed it up the cliff, everything would change. I just had to decide if I was ready for that. I took a deep breath and followed the wolf up the cliff face. We climbed for several minutes. It was getting darker, and the air was getting colder. There was a tension, a feeling like something big was about to happen. The alpha wolf looked at me for a second, then led me toward a small opening in the rock. The other wolves disappeared into the fog, leaving only the alpha to guide me, if that's what it was doing. Jake, you coming, man? Alex called again. He sounded excited, just like he had so many times before. I kept my rifle at a low ready and followed the wolf, thinking of all the times I'd found Alex in a place like this, looking for something. Most of the time, it was nothing. But occasionally, it was some ancient petroglyph or a piece of metal he'd found, and he'd get all worked up, thinking it was part of some ancient treasure or a lost civilization. The crevice led to a series of switchbacks that took us up the canyon wall. The alpha was moving slowly now, like it wanted me to keep up. Its fur had a strange metallic sheen that I hadn't noticed before. Remember Eagle Cliff? I yelled up to Alex, trying to keep him talking as I climbed. When you were sure you'd found a Ute burial chamber. This is different. He yelled back. This is real. I've been telling the truth. Jake. The containers, the wolves, everything. It became more and more dangerous, with steep drops on one side and sheer rock on the other. The alpha seemed to float across the rocky landscape, easily going over parts that I had to scale with my hands and feet. "Like that real Spanish gold cache you found last spring?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, but feeling my chest tighten as I remembered dragging him out of that collapsed mine shaft. The one that turned out to be old mining equipment. "You never could see the bigger picture, Jake," Alex said, his laugh sounding off. "Always with your logic and reason. But they've told me things, Jake. Things that change everything." The wolf led me onto a small ledge and stopped, staring at me. I could see a cave behind it. My brother was standing at the entrance, and he looked different somehow. "What happened to you, Alex?" I asked. "You look..." He laughed that weird laugh again. "No, Jake, I'm saved. The wolves, they're not beasts. They're guardians, keepers of an ancient power." I took a step closer, and the alpha's eyes followed me. "What are you protecting?" "The containers. The ones I said I needed to show you." Alex nodded back toward the cave. "They're not buried treasure or Native American relics. They're impossible." Suddenly, the wolf turned its head toward the cave entrance, and a low growl rumbled in its chest. Not aggressive, but more of a warning. Alex's face went from happy to worried. "We have to hurry," he said, looking at the sky. "The storm's coming, and they only allow visitors during certain alignments. You have to see this now, Jake. While the gateway is still open." Part of me wanted to run to call for backup, to follow the rules. But I couldn't. "What am I looking at here, Alex?" He moved away from the wall, and I saw a tunnel leading into the rock with a pattern similar to the one on the cylinder. "The wolves didn't come across the containers, Jake," Alex said quietly. "The containers came across them, changed them, and now they've been waiting for someone to receive their message." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the alpha's eyes began to glow even brighter, along with the flickering lights in its fur. "One more time, Jake," Alex said, offering his hand. "Want to find out what's really in your mountains?" I looked at the wolf, then at Alex, then at the impossible tunnel behind them. I knew what I was about to do was against every rule and regulation. I knew there was no way I could ever explain this to anyone, even if I tried. But a part of me had always wanted to know what was causing all the strange things that had been happening in this place. And now I had the chance to find out. I took a step forward, and the alpha wolf began to glow. The world seemed to tilt and blur as the alpha's light intensified, bathing the mountainside in a strange silver glow. Time stretched like taffy, seconds turning into minutes, as the light pulsed in patterns that matched the tunnel walls. The storm drew closer, its thunder now a constant, low rumble that vibrated through the rock beneath my feet. In those endless moments between decision and what comes after, the afternoon light faded, as if the approaching storm had sped up the day's end, plunging the gulch into early dusk. The light from the alpha wolf's face dimmed, and I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Alex was already halfway into the tunnel. I was tempted to follow him, but didn't want to get too far from the entrance. A howl came from nearby, but it wasn't the alpha wolf. It was coming from further down the gorge. The alpha wolf turned to look in the direction of the sound, then ran off, leaving me alone. I checked my radio again. Still nothing. The clouds had ground thicker, casting shadows over the geometric shapes. "Alex," I yelled down the tunnel. Nothing. I could smell wood smoke nearby, which was unusual since most people weren't allowed to have campfires up here. I went back to the entrance and looked down into the gulch. A small plume of smoke was rising in the distance, about half a mile away. I began to climb down carefully. The path the wolf had taken was too steep to follow without falling, so I had to make my own way down, using some of the paths I'd found years earlier. "Base, this is Jake," I said again, mostly out of habit. investigating possible camp whereabouts in Sector 8 Pond. As I got nearer to the source of the smoke, I started to smell something else. Something metallic and sharp. I saw a flicker of orange light through the trees and realized someone had started a small campfire. I gripped my rifle and walked slowly toward it. Finally, I came to a small clearing and saw the equipment laid out: the satellite GPS, the thermal imaging camera, and the tool for digging and finding metal. And I saw Alex, sitting beside the campfire. He had a golden cylinder next to him, which was open. "They brought me the quick way," Alex said without looking up. "You took the long way. Did the wolves show you?" He chuckled. The same strange chuckle as in the cave. "No, not the wolves. We keep calling them that, but that's not what they are anymore." I looked around, closer to the fire pit now. The ground around here was disturbed. It looked like something had been digging. "What are you carrying in there?" I asked, even though I thought I shouldn't. He looked up finally, and I saw his eyes shimmering in the firelight, reflecting silver like the alphas had. "The truth about your mountains, Jake. About why some parts of it don't show up right on satellite scans. Why compasses don't work properly near the old mine entrances." "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, but my throat was dry. "Let's get you back to base. Get you looked at. Still playing the ranger?" "Huh." He grinned, but it was a wrong grin. "Still trying to keep order in a place that just doesn't allow it. Didn't you ever wonder why so many rangers were assigned to watch these areas? Why certain documents are redacted from even senior staff?" The wind picked up again, causing a strange electricity in the air. The fire dimmed, then grew brighter, turning blue. "The containers were here first," Alex said, his fingers tracing the gold exterior. "Before the first settlers, before the tribes, before..." He paused, cocking his head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "Before time was time." Another crack of thunder sounded. I should call for backup, I thought. But the radio wouldn't work here, and we both knew it. "Please let me see." Alex's eyes lit up. He reached into the canister and pulled out something that hurt my eyes to look at, as if it was bending in on itself in a strange and impossible way. "They've been looking for a man like you, Jake. A man who can see beyond the veil and still follow the rules." He handed me the impossible item. "Here, they want you to have it." There was a flash of lightning, and I saw the eyes again. But this time, there were more. A lot more. Dozens of pairs of silver eyes watching from the woods, just beyond the tree line. Their beautiful metallic fur shone like liquid mercury. The alpha walked out from the trees and into the clearing. It looked bigger than before. It came to a stop between us, looked at Alex, then turned to me. "Last chance to turn back, Jake," Alex said. "Last chance to return to your paperwork and rules and sensible answers." I looked at the object in Alex's hand, at the watching pack, at the storm, dark sky above. 15 years of ranging these mountains, and I had always known there were things I couldn't explain, things I'd written off or filed away in that part of my mind reserved for later investigation. Later had finally arrived. I reached for the object, and the world began to change. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as my hand moved through the air, each millisecond expanding into an eternity. The storm above held its breath, lightning frozen in mid-strike, raindrops suspended like diamonds around us. Then reality snapped back like a rubber band, and 3 heartbeats passed in complete darkness. When awareness returned, I found myself still reaching, but the clearing had transformed. What had been wild and storm-swept was now eerily still, bathed in the supernatural glow of a fire I didn't remember being lit. Its flames cast impossible shadows through the mist that had materialized around us. I reached out and took what Alex was holding. As soon as I touched it, I knew it was something unnatural. The firelight changed, and the air hummed with a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel reverberating in my bones. "Easy," Alex said, his silver eyes staring back at me. "I hear the first time you touch one. It's electric. It was hot and cold, smooth and rough, all in one. And it was impossible to look at." "What am I holding?" I asked. At least I think I did. He was interrupted by a growl from the Alpha. The wolf had come closer. "They're happy," Alex said, smiling. "They've been waiting a long time for someone else to see." It pulsed once, giving me a strange feeling in my arm. It wasn't painful, but it was like the memory of pain, as if I'd had 1,000 injuries all at once, but only in my mind. "Alex, I don't think we should." There was another pulse. Everything around me began to spin, and I tried to let go of the object in my hand but couldn't. "Just let it happen," Alex said. "It's okay." I was hunting in the woods, feasting on bloaty meat, watching the stars move across the night sky, the mountains rise and fall. "Jesus Christ," I croaked or attempted to. My mouth felt funny, like it was full of teeth, howling a cry of pain. I heard Alex scream and fall to the ground beside the fire, convulsing. I looked to see what was going on and saw him on the ground, fighting to get the object out of his hand. I was the wolf, seeing the lights falling from the sky. I was the mountain, feeling the metal bite into me. I was the wind, carrying the message to the world. "Make it stop," I said, but it came out more like a growl. The Alpha was standing in front of me. The image of a wolf was replaced by something else, something that made my head spin. I instantly understood what had happened. The containers hadn't been discovered by the wolves. The containers had created the wolves. Alex screamed, and I dropped the canister. As it hit the ground, the link was broken. "Alex." I wobbled over to his fallen body. "They showed you," he said, blood coming out of his nose. "You saw it too." The Alpha stepped out from between us, looking down at the object. The other wolves were all staring at it as well. "What do we do now?" I asked, unsure if my question was directed at Alex, the wolves, or the unfathomable being I just touched the mind of. Alex sat up, wiping blood from his face. "What now?" I asked him. "No, we decide what to do with what they've shown us." The fire went out. It was dark again, except for the dim metallic shine of the wolf fur and the faint glow from the canister. "The Rangers," I said, my mind slowly coming back to me. "The secret files, they knew about this, right?" He laughed a little, despite it all. "Some of them, not everything, not what we just saw." The Alpha's ears perked up suddenly, and I felt a change in the atmosphere. "They're coming," Alex said, silver eyes wide. "The others. The ones who left the containers." I looked up at the sky, my mind going back to those memories of lights coming down from above. The Alpha rubbed against my leg, sending a zap of static electricity through me. "Okay, Jake," Alex said. "Do you want to see how far the rabbit hole goes?" It started to rain and steam rose from the object as the droplets touched its hot surface. I felt the world changing around me, like the laws of physics, and everything I knew about the mountains were being rewritten. And whatever was up there was on its way down to check on its investment. Rain began to pour down, and we backed away from the object as lightning crackled in the sky. The Alpha growled at us, and through the rain, I saw dark shapes approaching. The standoff between us and the Alpha had gone from tense to terrifying. Only a few minutes remained until nightfall, and those few minutes had passed while we were distracted by the object. Now we were surrounded. Suddenly, there was a loud, feral growl that did not sound like any of the Alpha's prior growls. This one sounded far less restrained and far more dangerous. I reached for my gun but found my hand still wouldn't work properly after touching that thing. More wolves began to come out of the forest around us, but these ones weren't like the others. They seemed larger, more deformed, almost as if they were growing and mutating. Their jaws were foaming with a noxious ooze that seemed to burn the dirt below them. "Alex," I muttered. "Stay still." The man was already backing away, looking terrified. "It's not supposed to happen this way," he choked out. He said. One of the new wolves came into view. It was the biggest one, the leader, and its eyes glimmered with the same glow I had seen coming from the canister. But there was no intelligence in those eyes, only hunger. The canister, Alex choked. It wasn't an invitation. It was a lure. It suddenly dawned on me that we weren't selected. We were baited. The alpha stood between us and the pack, ready to protect us, but it didn't look nearly as powerful compared to these monsters. "Jake," Alex said. "Run." The monsters disappeared from view for a second, only to reappear at the other side of the clearing. They were on top of Alex now, biting and tearing at him. "Alex," I called out, tumbling forward, my instinct to help battling with my instinct to survive. The alpha didn't hesitate for a second. It struck me with its body, pushing me backward to the ground. I saw its eyes, and I realized this was the law of the jungle. This was the true nature of the world, and it had been amplified by the canisters, perhaps. I saw blood and heard the fire crackling. I saw Alex through the horde of mutated wolves. He looked at me and screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the hungry growls. I saw his hand reaching for me, and I saw the look of realization in his eyes. Then, nothing. One of the wolves turned around. It was the largest one of them, except for the alpha. It looked at me. I put my finger on the trigger, but the alpha pushed itself against my leg again. "No," it seemed to say. "Watch." The wolf approached me. Its movements were erratic and reminded me of a broken robot. It stopped just in front of me. I felt its breath on my face. It smelled like metal. It looked me in the eyes, and I felt its mind touch mine. It was completely different from the mind I had felt when I touched the canister. This was a mind of pure hunger, and it was twisted and wrong. And then it backed away from me. I didn't understand why at first, but then I realized it had something to do with the alpha. It had marked me somehow. They had taken Alex. They had what they wanted. They backed off and disappeared into the cave. Their eyes glowed in the darkness for a little while, and then they were gone. The alpha looked at me. It nodded. It was as if it told me that I was one of them now. I had been marked. I belonged to them. I heard thunder in the sky. The storm was here. The alpha's pack revealed themselves from the surrounding forest. "What do I do now?" I asked again, broken. The alpha didn't answer me, but instead turned away from the fire and disappeared into the night. I sat there for a long time, staring at the fire until I heard a familiar voice on the radio. "Jake, this is Base. Do you read me?" I looked at the blood on the ground, at the canister. There would be no way to ever explain this. "Jake, is it?" I said. "I need you to come. You'll need to bring the tranq rifles, the big ones, because there was something out here in these mountains that was going to spread, and I had a feeling it wasn't just those wolves I saw." It took nearly 3 hours for the backup to arrive. I waited by the now extinguished fire pit, gun drawn, watching the shadows for movement as the moon disappeared behind the peaks of the mountains and the sun began to rise. The canister began to glow with a strange golden light. The radio went silent again, and I was left standing there, breathing in the cold air and the scent of blood, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. "Think," I said to myself, rolling the word. "Think like a ranger." I looked around and saw Alex's backpack. I wanted to leave it for his family so they would have something to bury. I took a step toward it. The canister shifted in my hands, and all at once I could smell everything. "No," I wanted to say, but my mouth felt strange, crowded with teeth. Not this time. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground. My fingers dug into the dirt, and I could feel the vibrations inside it, the life inside it. Not just the worms and the insects and the small creatures, but the life of the entire world. The beating hearts of every living thing in these mountains was in my ears, beating like a drum. The lifeblood of the deer, the elk, the mice, and the bears, all of it was in my head, in my veins, and my brain. The history of the place played out before me, and it was a history I had never known before. I saw the native tribes who had lived here, avoiding the caves and the canyons for reasons that had nothing to do with sacred and everything to do with fear. I saw the settlers going missing, not for the reasons we believed, but for reasons far more sinister. I saw the rangers over the decades, writing reports about the strange things they'd seen, trying to warn the outside world in their own way. My bones began to crack. I tried to scream, but it came out as a howl. The moon was up above, and it was pulling at something inside me. Control it, I panted, pushing myself up from the ground. Control. But it was clear I had no control over this. The canister continued to glow, and I was beginning to see things that I could have never imagined. The park was not just the park. It was an experiment that had been going on since before the beginning of mankind. I could see the first wolves. I could see the first wolves that had been turned into werewolves. I could see the aliens coming down from the sky in their spaceships, experimenting on the animals. And I could see the alpha werewolf, protecting the borders of the park from something I couldn't see. And I could feel my bones breaking, my skin turning inside out, my body growing larger. I was turning into a werewolf. Jake, can you hear me? My radio squawked, a voice speaking inhuman. I raced for it and grabbed it with my hand, which was now more like a claw. I squeezed it and crushed the plastic in my powerful grip. The light generated by the canister blinked once and went out. And suddenly, I understood what Alex had been talking about. The canisters found the wolves, not the other way around. They were designed to trigger the transformation in certain animals. The wolves were not the only ones. I roared in triumph, not in pain. My howl was not one of anguish but of victory. And by the sounds of it, I wasn't the only one who felt that way. The alpha's howl was loud in the distance, much closer than I would have expected. They were coming back, and they weren't coming to kill me. My radio crackled and died as I lost the last traces of my humanity. There would be no backup coming for me. No more reports. Tomorrow, they would find my clothes in the clearing, and that would be it. Maybe they'd find some tracks leading into the woods, and some of them would make a guess as to what had happened. But there was no way to know for sure. It would be just one more unsolved case to add to the pile. One more story to tell around the campfire. But tonight, I would be running alongside the pack, protecting the park from the outside world, and the outside world from the park, keeping the wolves from spreading the disease, and the disease from spreading to the wolves. I picked up the scent of the alpha and followed it into the woods, leaving my clothes and my old life behind. The night was full of possibilities. I could sense the presence of the other wolves, and I knew that they would soon be mine to command. The alpha would be the first to welcome me into the pack. I would run with them, learn from them, and in time, I would become one of them. And once I had learned everything there was to know about being a wolf, I would take my place as their leader. And I would hunt down those deer. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest floor. It had been a long night, and I had spent most of it running through the woods, chasing after the pack. I didn't remember much of it, but I had a feeling that I had enjoyed it. It had been exhilarating in a way, but now that the sun was up, I started to feel more like myself again. I managed to find my way back to the clearing where it all started. The moonlight dimmed, and I was on my hands and knees in the field, naked. My shredded clothing was nearby, and I was covered in dirt and blood. My fingers were crusted with mud and dried blood as well. The canister was in front of me, the top torn off. The papers were surrounding me. Some of them were shredded, others remained intact. I picked up one of the intact ones. "Don't," I said out loud, but my hand was already touching it. The patterns still moved, but I didn't feel the same connection to them as I had earlier. Base to Jake, "Do you read me?" Sarah asked through the mangled radio, her voice faint. "We're sending in backup. What's your location?" I looked at the radio, not sure how to answer that. I still had a metallic taste on my tongue and wasn't sure if it was my blood or not. "Jake," I said at last, my voice hoarse. Alex Reed confirmed deceased. Killed by animal. There was static for a few seconds before she responded. "Copy that." "What are the injuries?" I thought about the blood and the monsters, and my brain tried to block out the memories. Multiple. Numerous attackers. That wasn't quite right, but it would have to do. Big dogs. Potentially rabid. Another pause, then. "Did you discharge your weapon?" "Negative." I looked over at my rifle, still on the ground where I'd left it. I was taken out of commission. Support is on the way. You are not to follow or engage. Is that understood? Hunter. I scoffed at that. Whatever had taken Alex had nothing to do with anything man-made. "Jake," Sarah said again, but more casual this time. "Are you sure you're all right?" I glanced at my hands again. Everything was different now. The moon was still calling to me. "I'm good," I said. Just get the teams." I picked up another paper from the canister, only partly burned. The symbols on it seemed to move, to change. I should throw them in the fire, I thought. Burn them all. But I couldn't. A part of me wanted to know. Just like Alex, just like all the other people who'd been drawn to this place. "They're going to come back," I said, even though Sarah was already gone. "The messed up ones. They're going to want more." As if to answer my question, a howl came from the canyon behind me. It wasn't the Alpha's howl, though. It was one of the corrupted ones. I shivered at the thought of what they could do to me in my current state. I remembered the state we had found Alex in. What if they did that to me? The thought of those sharp teeth digging into my flesh made me shiver with fear. There was plenty of evidence to suggest that a struggle had taken place there. There was the remains of my uniform, the broken radio, and the pool of blood. But that didn't mean that I had to convince anyone of what had truly happened. I would report the incident just like everyone else did in these situations. I would tell the truth, knowing that the truth wasn't enough to explain what had happened. "I'm so sorry, Alex," I muttered as I picked up the last of the canister's contents. "I should have believed you." I heard a howl again, closer this time. There was a part of me that wanted to howl back, but I stifled it, clenching the bed sheets tightly. Sarah's voice came on the radio again. "Teams are 15 minutes out. Can you make it to the access road?" I looked at the trees and saw the pack was still out there. They were watching me, waiting to see what I would do. "No," I replied. "I'm staying here. Just tell them to bring lights. Lots of lights. Because something dark was stalking these mountains, wearing the skin of a wolf. And now I knew what they were hunting." I took Alex's backpack, my own shredded uniform, anything that might help explain what had happened here. I poured the contents of the canister into an evidence bag, with a feeling that it would not help to explain things. Then I went to the place where I had met the rescue teams and waited for them to find me. I touched my face, feeling the lingering effects of what I had become. The transformation had reversed, but I could sense it was still there. waiting to resurface. Just like the Alpha Pack, waiting for the next time I ventured into these woods. It would be a long time before the sun rose, and I had a lot of explaining to do. The long night was not over yet. It took several more hours before the floodlights arrived, along with the rest of the search parties. They interviewed me and asked me questions, but I barely remember any of it. I had to stay there until the morning, and I watched the stars disappear from the sky as I considered everything that had happened, and what I would do next, and what I would do after that. I didn't want to stay out in the forest any longer than I had to, so I tried to make a signal fire right there in the clearing. But I couldn't get it started. The best I could manage was a little flicker of flame, but it didn't produce nearly enough smoke to be seen from a helicopter. I grabbed the flare gun and fired off 3 rounds in succession. The international distress signal for SOS. Base, this is Jake. I cut and tried again. Base, flares are out. Same location as before. Roger that, Jake. Support is en route. Sit tight. I took note of his backpack, which he had placed carefully on the ground a few feet away from the gruesome scene. There was something shiny sticking out of the side of it. A compass. You, Alex, I muttered, tears in my eyes. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? I heard a twig snap and turned around. I thought of grabbing my rifle, but remembered it was all the way over there. The Alpha appeared at the edge of the tree line. Its eyes had lost some of their glow, but they were still eerily bright. Here to admire your work. I was borderline feral, the old ranger code doing battle with urges I had yet to master. It came forward and stopped just at the end of the red soil. It bowed its head before looking up at me with those eyes again. I don't know what to do with this, I said softly. Any of it. Bye. My radio buzzed. Jake, be advised, first team 5 minutes out. Any sign of hostile wildlife. The Alpha's ears twitched at the voice, and I saw its first shimmer with that strange metallic hue, just like my skin had. No, I said, still looking at the wolf. I don't see anything. The beast's ears perked up as it heard something I couldn't detect, and it began to growl. They're coming back, aren't they? I asked, already knowing the answer. The twisted ones. The wolf just turned around and disappeared back into the forest. I stood there for a long time, trying to figure out how I was going to explain all of this to the others. Beast, just a heads up, I said. There's going to be some weird in my report. Copy that, Sarah said after a few seconds. Director Wilson is on his way. He requests that any strange objects be bagged for his inspection. I glanced at the bag, at the impossible symbols. Understood. The helicopter came into view, its spotlight casting eerie shadows across the clearing as it landed. I caught sight of something at the edge of the forest. A pair of glowing eyes. A hint of a snarl. The Alpha's pack hadn't left me. They were watching, waiting to see how I would handle the aftermath. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. I would have to deal with my new reality, but not right now. First, I had to make sure the truth didn't come out. The helicopter touched down, and I prepared to meet my colleagues. To face them as a ranger who had just witnessed a massacre, and not as the monster I was destined to become. Let's give them the truth they deserve, I said to myself, but not the whole truth. I heard a howl coming from behind me. It wasn't a howl of a hunt or a howl of warning. It was a howl of reminder. I was part of their world now, and they were part of mine. When the twisted ones came back, they would come back for more victims, more people to transform into their likeness. But this time, we would be ready. The helicopter pilot shut down the engine, and a dozen rangers with guns spread out to secure the area. I took a deep breath and turned around. It was time to explain to the investigation team what had happened. I had a story ready, one that would match the official version. One that wouldn't reveal the existence of the wolves, and by extension, the twisted ones. It was a story that would keep the three of us safe. The sun had come up, but the darkness had given me something that I never could have gotten in the light. 3 days passed as if in a dream. I was debriefed and examined by the authorities, and I gave them the answers I knew they wanted to hear. It didn't take long before an investigation team was sent out, and I was back at the same spot where everything had taken place. After a couple of hours, the sun began to rise over the trees, changing the shapes of the shadows. Even still, there were parts of the forest which remained cloaked in darkness. I had gone through several evidence bags before finding one which would contain the object. It kept squirming and moving, and the rectangles and squares of the E reader were coming through the plastic, as if bleeding through it. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. I heard something moving behind me, but I didn't turn around. "Base, I see them. Over," I said into my half-broken radio. "Roger that, Jake. Director Wilson wants this thing contained." I wanted to laugh. Contain what? The blood on the ground, the echoing howls that had no source, the memories of my body transforming. Roger that. A helicopter landed about 50 yards away, blowing the leaves on the trees with the wind from its rotors. A few seconds later, 4 park rangers emerged, armed with rifles. A forensics team also exited the chopper, dressed in white suits. "Hey, I'm here," I said, waving my hand. Last to emerge from the helicopter was Director Wilson. He glanced at the bloodstains in the backpack on the ground, then at my ripped uniform. "Rough night, Jake?" he asked. "Wes, sir," I said. The crime scene team was taking photos and putting down evidence markers, unaware of the fact the blood they were labeling belonged to a man who'd opened a door to something far older than mankind. "All right, tell me what happened," Wilson said, leading us away from the commotion. I took a deep breath, smelling ozone and blood. Alex Reed entered the restricted area despite warnings. His emergency beacon went off as Ura 300. I followed it here and found evidence of... I trailed off, remembering the things I'd seen. "What kind of signs?" "Big predators," I muttered. "Working in groups, but not right, like rabies, but coordinated." Wilson didn't seem surprised by this, but he asked, "What about the canister?" I gave him the evidence bag. He said, but squeezed the handle a little tighter. A young woman brought over what was left of Alex's jacket. "Sir, you might want to take a look at this." We followed her to where Alex's backpack was lying on the ground. She pointed at something inside the bag. It was made of metal, and I saw it was his compass. The needle was spinning in circles. "Electromagnetic interference?" the tech asked. "Take it," Wilson said. "Take everything." I watched as they went through the evidence, but I knew they would never find a place to put this in a box. It didn't fit. "The wolves," Wilson said softly. "Did you see their eyes?" I turned to him. "Sir, forget it." He adjusted his blazer. "I'll expect you to write up your full account by the end of your shift. Just the verifiable details. Observable facts. Like how the blood of Alex had steamed when it hit the ground. Like how those mutated wolves had moved in ways that defied physics. Like how the moon had reached down into my DNA and pulled something out of it." "Yes, sir," I said. A howl echoed from down in the canyon, distantly at first, but then more clearly. The equipment began to feedback, and the rangers raised their weapons. "At ease," Wilson called. "It's just some wildlife." But he was staring at me with a look that said he knew what I was talking about. I said, "About last night." "Write it all in the report. Jake." He put his hand on my shoulder, lowering his voice. "Some things are just better left unsaid." "All right." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of responsibility taking hold. The sun was rising in the sky, and the shadows were stretching across the ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of gray fur in the underbrush. It was gone before I could get a good look. "Jake," said Wilson, pausing to get my attention. "Yes. If I were you, I wouldn't ask too many questions about what happened last night." "Well, you—" He left me standing there staring after him. The helicopter took off, leaving me alone in the clearing. I stood there for a while longer, looking at the place where the bodies had been, listening to the wind in the trees. I had a report to write. I wondered what I should say about all this. Should I tell the truth or leave it out? The ride back to headquarters was uneventful. I thought about what I'd seen and heard, trying to make sense of it all. It was a lot to process, and I wasn't sure I would ever be able to. But one thing was for certain: I would never look at the woods the same way again. I was completing some paperwork at the visitor center later in the day, filling out incident reports and trying to get the bizarre symbols on the evidence bags out of my mind. "That's it for now, Ranger," Director Wilson said, picking up the pile of freshly wiped paperwork. "I want you to take some time off. Think things over." I nodded, not wanting to try speaking. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, and Jake," Wilson said, stopping at the door. "Some of the other Rangers have mentioned that you're acting a little bit off. Try to fix that." Different. I thought of Alex, of silver eyes and skeletal limbs crawling through the night. "Yes, sir. I will." The visitor center was closing up for the day. Only a few people were left, and they gave me a wide berth as I walked through. It was as if they knew something was different about me, as if they could tell I was dangerous. I went outside and looked at the mountains, seeing them for the first time with my new eyes. I could see so much more detail. I could hear things I'd never heard before. The parking lot was almost empty, but instead of going to my truck and getting in, I found myself heading for the Thunder Lake Trail. "Hey, nice night for a hike," another hiker called out to me nervously. "Yep. Follow the main trails. Make sure you leave before it gets dark," I responded instinctively. She passed by, whispering to the person she was with. "Did you see his eyes?" I didn't need to look in a mirror to know what she had seen. The change was still partly there, and it was obvious in my eyes and the way I moved. There was a shine to my pupils that glinted silver, and my movements had an unnatural, almost fluid quality. The trail eventually led to an overlook, a popular spot for tourists to take pictures of the mountains behind them. But I could see more than just mountains now. I could see the places where the world was then, and where the old ones had left their mark on the world in ways that most people would never understand. "Told you, man," I said, even though Alex couldn't hear me. "You came to me with your theories so many times." The wind whispered through the trees, and a moment later, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. "Good evening, Jake." I turned around to see Sarah from dispatch standing a few feet away. "Hey, Sarah. What are you doing out here? I was worried about you. That was a lot to witness earlier today." I wondered for a moment if she knew more than she let on. How many other people who worked here knew about these mountains? You ever ask yourself why some places don't appear on our maps? She frowned, as if that were a question I shouldn't be asking. "That's what my brother used to say, before he started getting answers." There was a hull in the distance. Not the Alpha's pack, but a different one of the new ones. Sarah reached for her radio. "I need to report that." "Forget it," I said, casting my eyes back to the mountains. "This isn't going in any incident report." There was a pause, then she said, "The director told me you're going on leave." "Just for a few days," I have to get used to it. Used to what, Jake? I let her see what I had seen. She didn't look away. To the truth about our park, I said quietly. To the real reason we're out here protecting it. A low rumble came from the sky, but it wasn't cloudy. Just be safe, she said. Whatever you found up there. Some things can't be unseen. I watched as she walked back to the visitor center, not even bothering to call in on her radio. The sun was setting on the horizon, and the sky was turning a dark crimson red, and I could hear the whispers of the night. The alpha came walking out of the deep forest, looking at me. I watched it back. It wasn't a subordinate look. It was a look of respect. We were partners now. Partners in keeping this place safe from the powers of the night. I could hear the howls of the shadow wolves in the distance, and I knew they were on the hunt. But this time, they wouldn't get far. I took off my jacket and let the transformation begin. There was no need for me to report back to anyone. The story of the shadow wolves didn't end with me. It would be told by the howls of the night, in a language no human could understand, and it was true what Alex had said. The wolves knew where to find the mysteries of the dark. And now, so did I. The alpha stood still until the sun had set completely. It wasn't like I planned to end up in some Alaskan backwater. Seriously, who does that? It was just burnout man. 10 years of staring at spreadsheets under those awful fluorescent lights will mess you up. I was Ethan, a guy who needed an escape, somewhere far away, quiet, and with zero chance of hearing another car horn. That's how I stumbled on Eagle's Rest Lodge during some late night, half-crazed internet search. The website was all breathtaking views, private ski trails, and complete tranquility. Sounded perfect, even though I hadn't skied since I was a kid and broke my arm. The day I drove up, the sky was this solid sheet of gray, the kind that just sucks the color out of everything. My little rental car was the only thing on the road for miles, and the only other sign of life was the occasional crow, which, let's be honest, is never a good omen. By the time I got to the lodge, the sun was already hiding behind these jagged peaks, and the shadows were getting seriously long and creepy. Eagle's Rest was huge, all dark wood, and a roof so steep it looked like it was trying to touch the sky. It was supposed to be all classic alpine, but honestly, it felt kind of empty. I mean, there were lights on and smoke coming out of the chimneys, but it didn't feel cozy, you know? Still, I figured it was just me being weird from the drive. The parking lot was empty except for this beat-up old truck with chains on the tires and a bed full of firewood. I grabbed my bags and trudged through the snow to the entrance. The snow was that loud, crunchy kind, and it echoed like crazy in the silence. A little brass bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The lobby was grand, I guess. Super high ceilings, those big exposed beams, and a massive stone fireplace that was actually roaring. The warmth was amazing, thawing out my face instantly. Behind the reception desk, there's this woman, mid-30s maybe, with reddish-brown hair and this bright, almost too cheerful smile. Her name tag said, Clara. Welcome to Eagle's Rest Lodge, she chirped. All warm and welcoming, but it felt a little rehearsed, you know. You must be Ethan. We've been expecting you. I nodded, wiping the melting frost from my beard. Long drive, but I'm glad to be here. Most people are, she said, and her tone got a little. I don't know, flat. Clara handed me a room key, this heavy brass thing shaped like a pine cone, and pointed me toward the east wing. As she was talking, I noticed her eyes flick toward the big staircase behind me, just for a second. It was subtle, but it set off a little alarm bell in my head. Is it just me here? I asked, trying to sound casual. Her smile slipped for the tiniest moment. It's the off-season. Things are quieter this time of year. Quieter. The place felt deserted. But I let it go. Figured she was just trying to sell the whole peaceful getaway thing. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the forest. It was exactly what you'd expect from a fancy ski resort. Thick carpet, wood furniture that looked like it was made from whole trees, and a bed that could have slept a king. I unpacked fast, itching to stretch my legs. The first weird thing happened when I was heading back downstairs. The hallway was lined with all these old photos of the resort, the trails, and groups of smiling skiers from back in the day. I stopped at one, a black and white picture of a bunch of staff members standing in front of the lodge. Something about it bugged me. Their smiles looked fake, their eyes kind of wide and freaked out, like someone was holding a gun to their heads, telling them to look happy. But the real kicker was this jagged scratch right across the middle of the glass, totally blocking out one of the faces. I leaned in, trying to see who was behind the scratch, but just then, the hallway lights flickered, making me jump. I shook it off and headed down to the lobby, where I found Clara stacking firewood by the hearth. She straightened up when she saw me, settling in okay. "Yeah," I said, looking around. "It's just really quiet here." "It's peaceful, isn't it?" One way to put it. Chimera smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not really. "Dinner will be served at 6 in the dining hall. If you need anything else, just let me know." I nodded, but as I turned to leave, I caught her watching me. Her expression. I couldn't read it. Dinner was in this huge, empty dining room with these long tables that looked like they could seat 100 people. The only other person there was this burly guy in his 40s with a beard, sitting way off in the corner. Turns out it was Mark, the ski guide Clara had mentioned. He gave me a nod but didn't say much, just kept to himself. The food was okay, roast chicken and mashed potatoes, but the silence was seriously oppressive. The dining hall felt way too big, way too empty, like it hadn't been used in years. After dinner, I went back to my room and tried to read the book I'd brought, but my mind kept going back to that scratched-out photo and how weirdly quiet the whole place was. Around 100 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I turned off the lamp and lay in bed, listening to the wind rattling the window pane. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it. Footsteps. Faint at first, like someone was tiptoeing down the hall outside my room. I sat up, straining to hear. The steps were slow, deliberate. Then they'd stop, then start again. "Hello," I called out, but the footsteps just stopped. I waited a minute, then got out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was empty, just those dim wall sconces lighting it up. But as I stepped out, I saw something that made my stomach clench. There was a faint trail of snow leading from the end of the hall right to my door. The window at the end of the hall was cracked open, letting in a freezing draft. I hurried over and slammed it shut, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. When I turned back toward my room, I saw it. That photo, the one with the scratched-out face, it was perfectly fine now. No scratch. And the figure in the center. They were staring right at the camera, their face twisted into this knowing look. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink that night. Morning came grudgingly, like the sun itself was having second thoughts about showing up at this place. A weak, watery light filtered through my window, accompanied by the low moan of the wind howling over the peaks. I hadn't slept, but I told myself that daylight would make things seem normal. Whatever had happened the night before, the footsteps, the snow, the photo, it could all be explained away. Probably. Downstairs, the lodge felt just as deserted as it had the night before. Clara was behind the desk, her smile as bright and hollow as ever. "Sleep well," she asked, her voice cheerful in that same forced way. Not exactly, I admitted. There were noises, footsteps, and my window was open. I watched her carefully, looking for any sign that she knew more than she was letting on. Her expression froze for a split second, just a flicker of something behind her eyes, fear. Guilt. It was gone before I could really process it. Then she gave this practiced little laugh. This old lodge can be a little creaky at night. Probably just the wind. I wasn't buying it, but I nodded. I'm meeting Mark for a ski lesson, I said, trying to change the subject. She perked up a little at that. Of course, he'll be waiting for you outside. Stick to the trails and have fun. There was something about her enthusiasm that felt off, like she was trying too hard. It made my skin crawl. Mark was already at the slope when I got there, leaning on his ski poles with this look of mild annoyance. He was exactly what you'd expect from a ski guide at a place like this, rugged, stubbled, with a face that looked like it had seen a few too many winters. He barely acknowledged me as I approached. "You're late," he said gruffly, even though I wasn't. "Get your gear on." We started with the basics. Mark's instructions were curt, efficient, and totally devoid of any warmth. I got the feeling he didn't want to be there any more than I did. But as we made our way down the trails, something started to shift. The forest around the lodge was stunning, all towering pines and blankets of untouched snow. The air was sharp and clean, filling my lungs with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For a little while, I almost forgot about the weirdness of the night before. Almost. "Stick to the marked trails," Mark said suddenly, breaking the silence. His tone was sharper than it needed to be. "Don't wander off, no matter what you see or hear." I glanced at him. "Why, avalanches?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Something like that. Something like that." I pressed. Mark stopped abruptly, turning to face me. His eyes were hard, his voice low. "Look, you came here for some peace and quiet, right? Then take my advice. Stay on the trails. Don't ask questions. And don't go looking for trouble." There was a weight to his words that made my chest tighten. Before I could respond, he turned and started skiing back toward the lodge, leaving me alone with a growing sense of unease. I spent the afternoon on the beginner slopes, trying to shake off the feeling Mark had given me. By the time the sun started to dip behind the mountains, I was exhausted. The warm lights of the lodge beckoned, but as I started back, something caught my eye. At the edge of the tree line, just beyond the marked trail, a figure stood motionless. They were too far away for me to make out any details, but their posture was strange, rigid, unnatural. For a moment, I thought it might be Mark, but the figure didn't move, didn't wave. "Hello," I called out. No response. The wind carried my voice into the trees, but the figure remained still, a dark silhouette against the snow. A shiver crawled down my spine, and not from the cold. Against my better judgment, I edged closer, my skis crunching softly over the snow. The figure stepped back, deeper into the shadows. It wasn't running, exactly, but there was something deliberate about the way it retreated, like it wanted me to follow. When I reached the spot where it had been standing, I found nothing but a single leather glove lying in the snow. I didn't pick it up. Back at the lodge, I told Clara about the figure. She was behind the desk again, flipping through a guest registry that looked older than she was. When I mentioned the figure, her smile vanished completely. "You shouldn't have gone off the trail," she said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. "They were right at the edge." "Who was it?" I guessed. "Someone from the staff." Clara closed the registry and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "It was probably just a shadow. The snow and trees can play tricks on your eyes." "That wasn't a shadow," I said firmly. "There was someone out there." She opened her mouth to respond, But before she could, the bell above the entrance jingled. A man stumbled in, his clothes torn and covered in snow. He looked wild, his hair matted, his eyes bloodshot, and darting around the room like a trapped animal. "Don't listen to them," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "They're not here to help you." Clara's face went pale. "Sir, you need to leave." The man ignored her, fixing his gaze on me. "You think you're safe here. You think this place is what it seems. It's not. They're just keeping it happy." "What are you talking about?" I asked, stepping toward him. "Stay on the trails," he hissed. "And whatever you do, don't go into the woods." "Sir," Clara began. But the man bolted, disappearing into the night before anyone could stop him. The lodge fell silent again, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Clara looked shaken, her hands trembling as she picked up the phone. "I need to call someone about this," she said, her voice tight. "You should go to your room." "What just happened?" I demanded. "Who was that?" "Go to your room." "Ethan," she repeated, this time with more force. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man's words played over and over in my head. "They're just keeping it happy." What did that mean? Keeping what happy? A faint tapping sound pulled me from my thoughts. It was coming from the window. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My room was on the second floor. There shouldn't have been anything outside that window. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded as I forced myself to turn my head. A shadow was pressed against the glass. It didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. Its outline was human, but something about the proportions was wrong. Its arms too long, its neck slightly crooked. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the slightest movement would invite it inside. The tapping stopped, and then, slowly, the shadow slid out of view. I didn't sleep that night, either. The next morning, I woke to a soft knocking on my door. It was timid, almost hesitant, but persistent enough to drag me out of the restless sleep I'd finally fallen into as dawn broke. I checked the clock on the bedside table. 7:13 a.m., way too early for comfort. My body protested as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the events of the previous night still thick in my memory. "Who is it?" I called out, but there was no answer. The knocking stopped, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. I hesitated before opening the door, half expecting to find another shadow, or worse, nothing at all. Instead, Clara stood there, holding a steaming cup of coffee. She smiled, but her eyes darted past me and into the room, scanning it quickly before meeting my gaze. "Good morning, Ethan," she said brightly, though her tone felt strained. "I thought you might need this after last night. You looked restless when I saw you heading back to your room. Thought I'd check on you this morning." Restless was one way to put it, but something in her demeanor was off, like she knew more than she was letting on. I decided to test the waters. "Thanks," I said carefully. That tapping on the window didn't exactly help me sleep. Clara's face froze for a split second before she forced another smile. "The wind can be strange up here. Plays tricks on you." "Right," I said, matching her tone. "Wind that casts shadows." She didn't respond to that, but her knuckles tightened around the tray she was holding. After an awkward pause, she gestured down the hallway. "Breakfast is ready if you're hungry. Mark wants to talk to you about your next lesson. He's outside, clearing the snow." "Great," I muttered, already tired of the constant reassurances that everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. The dining room was empty again, save for a plate of scrambled eggs and toast waiting for me at one of the smaller tables. I ate quickly, the heavy silence of the lodge pressing down on me like a weight. When I finished, I decided to explore the building a little more. Something about this place wasn't adding up. and I wasn't going to find answers by sitting around. The lodge's layout was sprawling, with winding hallways and staircases that seemed to lead nowhere in particular. As I wandered, I noticed small details that I hadn't seen before. Scuff marks on the floors that looked like they'd been hastily cleaned, door handles that were scratched and worn, as if someone had been frantically trying to open them. And then there were the locked doors. Nearly every other hallway had at least one, a heavy wooden door with a small brass plate marked, "Staff only." They didn't look like storage closets, and the idea of an upscale resort having so many restricted areas struck me as odd. Eventually, I found myself in the basement. The air down there was colder, heavier, and it smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic. Rows of wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with supplies, bottled water, canned goods, and boxes of firewood. It all seemed normal enough, until I spotted one particular door at the far end of the room. Unlike the others, this one wasn't marked. Its surface was plain, and the doorknob had been replaced with a rusted padlock that looked decades old. It was out of place in an otherwise pristine storage area, and curiosity got the better of me. I glanced around to make sure I was alone before pulling at the lock. It didn't budge, of course, but the chain rattled loudly in the stillness. Frustrated, I scanned the room until I spotted a small crowbar resting against one of the shelves. With some effort, I wedged it under the padlock and pried it loose, the old metal groaning in protest before snapping free. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dimly lit room. The first thing I noticed was the smell stale and musty, with a hint of something acrid underneath. My flashlight illuminated the contents of the room, and my stomach churned at what I saw. Old maps covered one wall, their edges frayed and yellowed with age. Most of them depicted the mountain, but certain sections were crossed out with thick red X. A pile of missing person posters sat on a table in the corner, each one bearing the faces of smiling men, women, and even children. They all had the same thing in common: the word Ice Age, stamped in bold letters across the bottom. But the strangest thing was the equipment: skis. Poles and snowshoes leaned haphazardly against the walls, their designs outdated by decades. Some looked barely used, while others were broken or twisted, as if they'd been violently bent out of shape. I picked up one of the posters, my hands trembling. The date on it was from 5 years ago, but the man in the photo looked eerily familiar. I realized, with a jolt, that he resembled the stranger who had burst into the lodge the night before, warning me to stay on the trails. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something elser, an old, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of maps. I flipped it open, skimming the entries. The handwriting was shaky, the words frantic. "There's something on this mountain. I've seen it in the trees, watching. It knows when you stray from the trails. It's not human. It's not an animal. It's something else." Further down, another entry read, "I tried to leave today. The road was clear, but I couldn't reach it. Every time I thought I was getting closer, the trees seemed to shift. It doesn't want me to leave." The final entry was the shortest, scrawled in uneven letters that looked like they'd been written in a hurry. "They come at night. Don't look at them." A loud clatter behind me snapped me out of my trance. I whipped around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. The crowbar I'd used to pry the door open had fallen to the floor, though I didn't remember leaving it anywhere near the edge of the shelf. I grabbed the journal and bolted, leaving the door ajar behind me. Clara found me in the lobby an hour later, clutching the journal like a lifeline. She noticed the dirt on my hands and the wild look in my eyes, but didn't say anything at first. Instead, she sat down across from me, her expression guarded. "Where were you?" she finally asked. "In the basement. I said bluntly. "What the hell is going on in this place?" Her face paled, and she glanced around the empty lobby as if to make sure no one was listening. "You weren't supposed to." She cut herself off, shaking her head. "Ethan, there are things you don't understand, things you're better off not knowing." "I think I have a pretty good idea," I shot back, slamming the journal onto the table. Missing people, shadows in the woods, and now this. Clara flinched but didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to leave." "I tried," I said. "The road is blocked." Her silence was confirmation enough. That evening, the power went out. I was in my room, staring at that journal. When the lights flickered and died, plunging the lodge into darkness, a cold, unnatural silence followed, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. I reached for the flashlight I'd left on the nightstand, but before I could turn it on, a familiar sound reached my ears. Footsteps. This time, they were louder, heavier, and they weren't stopping outside my door. They were coming up the stairs. I stayed frozen in place, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps reached the landing and stopped directly outside my room. Then came the tapping, deliberate and unrelenting. I didn't dare move. The handle rattled, and for a terrifying moment, I thought it would turn. But then the tapping stopped, and the footsteps retreated back down the hall. When I finally worked up the courage to check, the hallway was empty, but a single wet footprint marked the floor just outside my door, leading toward the grand staircase. Whatever this presence was, it wasn't done with me yet. The morning air was colder than it had been since my arrival, almost unnaturally so. Even inside the lodge, the chill seeped through the walls, as if the building itself was shivering. I found myself staring out the frosted window in my room, watching the endless white landscape. The lodge felt less like a retreat and more like a trap with every passing moment. Whatever was happening here was escalating, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could endure it. But I wasn't leaving, not yet, not without answers. I found Mark outside, clearing snow from the lodge's entryway. His face was as stony as ever, but his movements were tense, hurried. He barely acknowledged me when I approached, his shovel scraping rhythmically against the frozen ground. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Rough night." Mark paused, leaning on the shovel, and shot me a look that felt more like a warning than a greeting. "If you're smart, you'll keep to yourself today." "I think we're past that point," I said, stepping closer. I found something in the basement. Maps, missing posters, someone's journal. What's going on here? For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me. His expression softened just slightly, and he opened his mouth to speak. But then he shook his head and went back to shoveling. "You don't want to know." "Yes, I do, Mark," I pressed, my frustration boiling over. "I've seen things. Shadows outside my window. Footprints where there shouldn't be any. Something is out there, something." "Stop," he snapped, his voice low and sharp. He straightened, glaring at me with an intensity that froze the words in my throat. "You don't get it. The more you dig, the worse it gets. Whatever you think you're going to figure out, it's not worth it." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, his boots crunching through the snow. I stood there, seething, but a deeper part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Every time I pushed for answers, the lodge seemed to push back harder. I spent most of the day in the lounge, pretending to read while stealing glances at Clara. She was stationed at the reception desk, flipping through the same guest registry I'd seen her with before. Every so often, her eyes darted to the front door, as if she were expecting someone, or something, to walk through it. The tension in the air was suffocating, and by mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. I decided to go for a walk, despite Mark's warnings. Staying inside felt like surrendering to whatever was closing in around me. The snow was deeper than I'd anticipated, and the cold gnawed at my face as I trudged toward the trails. The sky was a pale gray, heavy with clouds that promised another storm. I stuck to the marked paths at first, the rhythmic crunch of my boots offering some comfort. But as I ventured farther, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I stopped, glancing over my shoulder. The woods were still. The only movement the occasional sway of snow, laden branches in the wind. But the unease didn't leave me. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then I saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by the shadows. It was the same as before, tall, unnaturally still, its outline vaguely human but somehow wrong. My pulse quickened, and I fought the instinct to run. Instead, I raised a hand, a half-hearted attempt at a wave. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I took a hesitant step closer, and that's when it moved, not away but toward me. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost predatory. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the icy trail. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice echoing through the silent forest. It stopped, tilting its head slightly as if considering my words. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought it might speak. But then it turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving behind only the faintest imprint in the snow where it had stood. I didn't follow. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead as I turned and hurried back to the lodge, the shadows of the forest pressing in around me. Clara was waiting for me when I returned. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as if to stop them from shaking. "You went out there," she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I had to," I replied, brushing past her. "I needed to see." "You don't need to see anything," she interrupted, grabbing my arm. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then explain it to me," I snapped, yanking my arm free. "Because every time I try to figure out what's happening, I get stonewalled by you or Mark. I'm done being in the dark." She hesitated, glancing around the empty lobby as if afraid someone might overhear. Finally, she sighed and motioned for me to follow her. We retreated to a small office behind the reception desk, where she closed the door and leaned against it. "This place," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "isn't what it seems. The lodge, the mountain, they're connected. There's something here, something ancient. It doesn't want us here, but it won't let us leave either." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What is it? Some kind of spirit? A curse?" "I don't know," she admitted, her eyes darting to the window. "But it's always watching. It knows when someone steps out of line, when someone tries to leave or interfere. That's why Mark and I stay. Because if we don't keep it happy, things get worse." "Keep it happy," I repeated, my stomach sinking. "How?" Clara didn't answer. Her silence was more chilling than any words she could have spoken. That night the blizzard hit. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and shaking the walls of the lodge. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely, plunging the building into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart pounding as the shadows closed in around me. And then the footsteps started again. They were heavier this time, more deliberate, and they weren't confined to the hallway outside my room. They echoed throughout the lodge, moving up and down the stairs, circling the building like a predator stalking its prey. I pressed myself against the door, my ears straining to listen. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside. My breath caught as I heard the faintest scrape of claws against the wood, followed by a low, guttural sound that didn't belong to anything human. The handle rattled once, twice, and then went still. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, trembling, waiting for whatever was on the other side to leave. Finally, the footsteps retreated, fading into the storm. The next morning, the blizzard had passed, but the lodge was eerily quiet. Clara and Mark were nowhere to be found, and the lobby was empty save for a thin layer of snow that had blown in through the front door. I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness, but no one answered. I knew then that I couldn't stay any longer. Whatever was happening here, it was beyond my understanding, beyond my ability to fight. I grabbed my things and made my way to the door, praying that the road would be clear. As I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a physical force. The snow was pristine, untouched, as if the storm had erased all traces of what had happened. But as I looked back at the lodge, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the window of my room, a shadow stood watching me. I didn't wait to see if it moved. I turned and started down the road, my only thought to get as far away from Eagle's Rest Lodge as possible. The road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by dense, snow-laden pines. The storm had cleared, but the oppressive weight in the air remained. Each crunch of my boots on the frozen ground felt like a countdown. My breath misted in the frigid air, every exhale carrying a fleeting sense of relief that I hadn't stopped moving. I couldn't risk it, not after what I'd seen, not after what I'd learned. And yet, the lodge loomed in my mind, a specter I couldn't outrun. I'd barely made it a mile from the lodge when I saw the footprints. They weren't mine, and they weren't fresh. A line of deep, deliberate indentations led off the road into the forest, where the trees were so dense they swallowed the pale light. I stopped, staring at the trail, my heart hammering against my ribs. No, keep going. But something gnawed at me, a thought that had taken root and wouldn't let go. The prints were human, at least they seemed to be. What if they belonged to Mark or Clara? What if one of them had tried to leave, just like me? Against every ounce of logic, I stepped off the road and followed the trail. The trees closed in around me, their branches clawing at the sky. The air was still, the kind of silence that wasn't natural. It muffled everything, including the sound of my own footsteps. The deeper I went, the darker it became until the world was nothing but shades of gray and black. The trail ended abruptly at a clearing, and what I saw froze me in place. The ground was disturbed, patches of snow churned into a chaotic mess. Broken branches littered the area, and in the center of it all was something, a mangled ski pole, its metal frame twisted like it had been gripped by something impossibly strong. Beside it lay a single leather glove. I took a step closer, my breath shallow, and noticed something else. The snow wasn't just disturbed, it was stained. Dark patches dotted the ground, their edges blurred and frozen. Blood. A sudden rustling broke the silence, and I whipped around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam caught the edge of movement, something tall, something fast. It darted between the trees, too quick to make out. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. Then came the sound, low and guttural, like the growl of an animal. But it wasn't an animal. It couldn't be. It was too deep, too resonant, vibrating in a way that made my teeth ache. I ran. By the time I stumbled back onto the road, my legs were trembling, and my lungs burned with every breath. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The forest had swallowed whatever was there, but I knew it wasn't gone. The lodge came into view before I even realized I was heading back toward it. My escape had turned into a retreat, and the sight of the building filled me with equal parts dread and desperation. I burst through the front doors, slamming them behind me, and leaned against the cold wood. The lobby was empty, just as it had been when I'd left, but something was different now. The air inside felt heavier, colder, like the walls were closing in. called out for Clara, for Mark, but my voice echoed an answer, and then I heard it, a faint creak from upstairs, like the groan of a floorboard under weight. I froze, my eyes darting toward the grand staircase. The sound came again, closer this time. Mark, I called, my voice trembling. Clara. No response. I crept up the stairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with identical doors, each one slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they hadn't been like that before. At the end of the hall, the door to my room stood open. The creaking came again, louder now, and I realized it wasn't coming from inside my room. It was coming from above, from the attic. The pulled-down ladder was already extended, its wooden rungs slick with frost. I stared up into the darkness, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run. But I couldn't. Whatever was happening here, it was centered in that attic. I had to know. I climbed. The attic was vast, its ceiling low and slanted. The air was colder than anywhere else in the lodge, biting at my skin, even through my jacket. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung in thick, glistening strands. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating stacks of old furniture and crates piled haphazardly against the walls. And then I saw it. In the center of the attic, surrounded by a circle of snow that had no business being there, was a chair. It was old, its wood splintered and gray with age. But it wasn't the chair itself that stopped me in my tracks. It was the figure sitting in it. The man was slumped forward, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His clothes were torn and stained, his skin pale and waxy. But even in the dim light, I recognized him. The stranger. His eyes were open, staring blankly ahead. But there was no life in them. His lips were parted, frozen in a silent scream. I took a step back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I noticed the writing on the floor, etched into the wood around the chair. It wasn't in English or any language I recognized. The symbols were jagged, chaotic, carved deep into the planks. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadows seemed to move. And then he spoke. It wasn't the stranger's voice. It wasn't even human. It was deep and resonant, a sound that seemed to echo inside my skull. You shouldn't have come here. The words hung in the air, and I stumbled back, my chest heaving. The figure in the chair didn't move, but the shadows around him did. They stretched and twisted, taking shapes that defied logic, their edges sharp and writhing. I turned and ran, scrambling down the ladder and nearly falling in my haste. The hallway below was darker now, the lights flickering weakly. I could hear it, whatever was in the attic, moving, its presence pressing down on me like a physical weight. By the time I reached the lobby, the air felt suffocating. The shadows were everywhere, pooling in corners and stretching toward me like grasping hands. The front door was open, snow blowing in and coating the floor. I didn't stop. I ran outside, into the cold, into the storm. I didn't stop running until I reached the road. The snow was deeper now, the path barely visible, but I kept going. The lodge faded behind me, its dark silhouette swallowed by the trees. And then, through the swirling snow, I saw it, a pair of headlights cutting through the storm, the faint rumble of an engine growing louder. A snowplow. I waved my arms frantically, stumbling into the road as the vehicle screeched to a halt. The driver, a grizzled man with a thick beard, leaned out the window, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I didn't have the energy to explain. "The lodge," I gasped. "Something's wrong. Please, just get me out of here." He hesitated, glancing past me toward the trees. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. But then he nodded, jerking his thumb toward the passenger seat. "Jet in." The hospital was warm, too warm, and the fluorescent lights burned my eyes. I told the doctors everything, every detail. but their skeptical look said it all. They humored me, of course, writing things down and asking questions, but I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me. A week later, a pair of police officers visited my room. They'd investigated the lodge, they said. Found it abandoned. No signs of recent activity. No staff. No guests. Just an old, decrepit building left to rot in the wilderness. I didn't argue. I didn't tell them about the shadow in the attic or the figure in the chair. I didn't tell them about the symbols or the voice that still echoed in my mind. I just nodded and let them leave, because deep down I knew the truth. The lodge wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. I don't know what's worse, that no one believes me, or that something like that still exists out there, waiting for the next fool to step into its trap.